In the opening scene, Frieren, the Grouch, is seen reading a grimoire while riding back to the royal capital with her 3 pals, Himmel, Heider, and Eisen, after finally taking down the demon king they've been chasing for 10 years. As the capital's walls come into view, Himmel and the others nudge Frieren to check out the beautiful walls and talk about what's next now that they're all retiring. But Free, who doesn't really feel the time passing, just brushes off the walls and has a chat with her friends, who are pretty nervous about the future. By the end of their talk, they're all laughing and joking around like true buddies. Before long, they roll into the royal capital and get welcomed by the whole city like the heroes they are. Soon after, they stand before the king, who personally thanks them for taking down the demon king and bringing peace to the kingdom. After the royal meeting, the heroes kick back until night to join the festival held in their honor. When night hits, Himmel and Eisen savor the tasty treats of the city, while Heider, who was a priest back then, drinks like there's no tomorrow. Himmel spots Frieren being a downer and tells her to lighten up since the king is planning to put up statues of them in the plaza. Frieren brushes him off and keeps waiting for the party to wrap up. About an hour later, the heroes all get together to gaze at the sky and say their goodbyes. After swapping some embarrassing and great memories from the last 10 years, including Frieren's silly blunders during their adventures, everyone except Frieren bursts out laughing. When the noise dies down, Himmel thanks everyone for making the last 10 years a blast. Frieren, the buzzkill, kills the vibe by saying it's just been 10 years, so it's not a huge deal. Knowing how bratty Frieren can be, Himmel ignores her and turns to watch the Era meteor shower, which only happens once every 50 years. As they soak in the once-in-a-lifetime moment, Frieren brings the mood down again by saying the view isn't that great from the city. To help him out, she promises to take him to a better spot in 50 years for a clearer view if he's still around by then. Himmel nods and keeps watching. The next morning, Frieren heads out of the royal capital to keep searching the fringes of the continent for spells and such. Even though Himmel and the others don't get how she views time, they wish her well. So, days pass into weeks, months, and years as Frieren keeps exploring. Over the years, she gathers so much knowledge and experience that she finally decides to take a break. After 50 years of wandering and collecting spells, she decides it's time to chill. One day, Frieren visits a local antiques and magic shop to buy a shadow dragon's horn. Unfortunately, she finds out they don't have any. Suddenly, she remembers one they snagged from the Demon King's castle ages ago and recalls that she made Himmel hang on to it. With the meteor shower coming up in a few weeks, Frieren decides to keep her promise to Himmel and goes after the dragon's horn first. After traveling for nearly a month, Frieren finally makes it to the city. While wandering the streets, she notices how much everything has changed. After searching for Himmel, she finally spots him. Unfortunately, the Himmel standing in front of her is not the one she remembers. Having left the city for 50 years, he's aged a lot and is pretty weak now. Frieren quickly asks about the horn she came for, and Himmel casually mentions he's had it tucked away in his cabinet the whole time. She scolds him for hiding something so dangerous, but Himmel just shrugs it off. He grabs the horn and hands it to Frieren, who doesn't think much of it. Once she has the horn, Frieren sends it back home with her magic bird and takes a moment to admire the statues they made back in the day. After soaking it all in, she heads back inside and gets Himmel to pack his bags so they can check out the meteor shower one last time. They hit the road and stop to meet Eisen the dwarf and Heider, who's now a full-on bishop, waiting at the city gates. After a warm welcome, Frieren leads them on a week-long trek to the spot she promised to take them 50 years ago. Along the way, they relive their glory days and get caught up in all sorts of adventures. When they finally arrive, they lie on the soft grass and watch the meteor shower together one last time. Himmel thanks Frieren for keeping her promise and letting him enjoy life with his friends before his time runs out. A few months later, Himmel passes away from old age. At his funeral, Frieren stands with Eisen and Heider, watching the procession. As people in the city pay their respects to the hero, they notice how blank her face is and insult her for being fake. When it's time to bury Himmel, Frieren finally breaks down, realizing how foolish she's been for not really getting to know him before he died. An hour after the burial, Heider hops into a carriage to head back to the holy city. Before he leaves, he says goodbye to Frieren, as if he knows it's the last time they'll see each other, and asks her to raise a glass at his grave next time she visits. Frieren asks if he's afraid of death, and Heider replies he's not worried since they'll all be together in heaven. Once he's gone, Frieren turns to Eisen and tries to convince him to be her bodyguard. Unfortunately, Eisen is getting old too, so he tells her he's not really available for that anymore. Frieren feels a bit sad, but she smiles at Eisen for being such a good friend. After everything, she sets off for her next adventure. 20 years later, Frieren shows up at the outskirts of the holy city to see Heider. After getting lost in the woods for what feels like the millionth time, she finally meets a little girl with purple hair. The girl seems nice to Frieren and asks what she's doing in the woods. Frieren says she's looking for a guy named Heider, and the purple-haired girl takes her to the cabin where Heider, the priest, lives. There, Frieren meets her old friend, who has a face full of gray hair, and they joke around a bit before settling in for tea. When things get serious, Heider introduces the purple-haired girl as Fern, a war orphan he rescued some time ago. When he asks why she's visiting him, Frieren replies that she wants to repay her debts to him before he passes away. Heider laughs it off and asks for a favor. When Frieren agrees, he tells her to accept Fern as an apprentice since she's pretty good with magic. Frieren flatly refuses because she fears Fern will become strong only to die later on. Moving on, Hyder asks for another favor, this time taking her to his library where he pulls out a coded grimoire of Ewig the Sage. He asks her to help him decipher it since it's rumored to hold lost spells for immortality and resurrection. Frieren opens the book and complains about how cheesy it all is. After some thought, she asks him why he wants to study the grimoire if he doesn't fear death. Hyder admits he was just pretending to be brave back then, and he is, in fact, scared of dying. Frieren scolds him, telling him to give her 5 or 6 years to figure the whole thing out. While she's at it, Hyder asks her to teach Fern some magic too. So, Frieren heads out to the woods and finds Fern standing at the edge of a cliff staring at a big rock across the mountain. Frieren notices how well the little girl controls her mana and sees a lot of potential in her. Fern tries to show off her skills by shooting a magic beam at the rock, but unfortunately, she misses. A bit confused, she asks Frieren what she needs to do to get a lot stronger. Frieren starts by asking if Fern really loves magic that much. When Fern says yes, she smiles and begins Fern's magic lessons. For her first lesson, Frieren breaks down magic control and mana strength to Fern while chilling by the riverside. She tells Fern she's got a long way to go before she can boost the mana in her body. When Frieren catches a glimpse of despair on Fern's face, she reassures her that her level of magic control is something to be proud of since not many at her age can do it. Fern acknowledges the compliments and keeps pushing forward. Over the next few years, Frieren dives into deciphering the Ewig grimoire while teaching Fern how to sharpen her magic skills. Fern, on the other hand, trains day and night to build up enough strength and mana reserves for her mission. One day, Hyder, now old and frail, finds Frieren in the library working on the grimoire. He asks her about Fern's progress. Frieren mentions that Fern is putting in the effort, but she still has a long way to go before she becomes a full-fledged mage. While they're chatting, Hyder suddenly collapses and wakes up hours later in bed. Frieren, surprisingly unfazed, says she'll speed up her work on the grimoire to help him in her own way. To do that, she tells Fern to take a break from training and spend time with her master in his final moments. When she arrives at their usual cliff, she finds Fern giving it her all hitting a rock and tells her to stop training to be with Hyder. Fern, however, lashes out and shares how Hyder saved her when she was about to jump off a cliff after losing her whole village and family. His words reached her heart and convinced her to keep living. Now that she has a chance to repay Hyder, Fern doesn't want him to regret saving her, whether it's becoming a mage or picking up another skill. She wants to do something significant to honor him before he passes away. After hearing her out, Frieren lets her follow her heart and continues interpreting the grimoire over the next few weeks. Fern keeps practicing until she finally feels ready to give it another shot. Then, one day, Frieren wraps up the whole grimoire. Turns out there's no spell for immortality or resurrection, and Hyder somewhat knew that. Instead of making a fuss, he stays calm and hopes for a quick death. Hours before he passes, Hyder asks Frieren how well Fern is doing. She tells him Fern is doing great, and Hyder urges her to take Fern on as her new apprentice, especially since Fern is now strong enough to fight alongside her. At this point, Frieren doesn't have much choice. It's her old friend's dying wish. But before she leaves, Hyder tells Frieren to grab her payment from the drawer in the house and to leave before night falls since he fears he might not make it through the day. Frieren tells Hyder to give Fern a proper goodbye so she doesn't feel abandoned. Hearing this, Hyder feels touched by his young friend and calls her a very kind girl. As she leaves the room, Frieren asks Hyder why he saved Fern in the first place. Hyder thinks for a moment and finally says it's because that's what Himmel would have done. Frieren heads to the cliff and sees that Fern has already knocked out her task. Soon after, she swings by Hyder's grave, pouring a couple of bottles of booze on it to pay her respects. After catching the funeral rites, she leaves with her new apprentice, Fern. Next, Frieren and Fern lend a hand to an old farmer, using magic to help him harvest pumpkins. They also snag a scroll with some folk magic tips on how to warm up tea. Fern spots the weird way they're getting paid, and asks Frieren why she doesn't just collect cash. Frieren brushes it off, saying it's her obsession, and she has to keep doing it to stay connected. When they hit the town next, they bump into a herbalist who takes them to the forest to check out the sorry state of the hero Himmel's statue. The woman reflects on how Himmel saved her when she was a kid during a demon attack on her village, so she feels bummed out seeing his statue in such bad shape. Frieren chimes in, saying he kind of deserves it since he caused a lot of headaches during the sculpting. The herbalist thinks that's a bit off, but she lets Frieren, the elven mage, start cleaning the statue. Once they're done, the herbalist looks around at the dull landscape and wishes it was a bit more vibrant. Since Frieren can magically grow flowers, she decides to spruce things up with some beautiful blooms. She picks blue moon weed flowers, ones she's never seen before. When Fern asks why she chose those, Frieren explains it's because they grow in Himmel's town. To recreate the flowers, Frieren needs to check out a picture to get a mental image. Luckily, the herbalist has a list, so she takes the girls back to her place and shows them a photo of the weed flower. After getting a glimpse, Frieren decides to go hunting for the flowers to copy them. She tells Fern to get ready, but Fern is seen hiding some seed rats from her. They chat a bit and then release the rats into the woods, brainstorming how to find and analyze the blue moon flowers so they can can conjure them up. Fern is all in, so they hit the road, chasing down every lead for 6 whole months with 0 luck. Finally, they decide to switch it up a bit and go back to the herbalist for another chat. The herbalist is pretty stoked about how long they've been at it, but Frieren thinks it's not such a big deal. When the herbalist asks Fern about their progress, Fern just says no and complains about Frieren's wild obsession with magic. The herbalist laughs, gives Fern a small pouch of medicinal flowers to plant instead, and encourages her to talk to Frieren about her worries. In the next scene, Fern opens up to the upbeat Frieren, showing her the pouch of seeds. While they're talking, a seed rat swipes their pouch and bolts into the woods. Frieren and Fern carefully chase after it, putting their conversation on pause. Along the way, Frieren brings up Fern's odd obsession again, and Frieren says it's all about her love for magic. After a little memory lane trip, they finally figure out where the seed rats stash their stuff. When they reach the tower's base, they spot petals from a familiar blue flower. Frieren floats up to the top of the tower and finally finds a wild patch of blue moon weed flowers. Thinking back to what Himmel told her about how gorgeous they were, she can't help but feel over the moon. Fern pops up wanting to throw some silly questions to get why Frieren loves magic so much. Eventually, Frieren gives her some scenarios until Fern gets it. A few days later, they head back to the statue and plant the weed flowers around it while the herbalist is there. After a bit of light conversation, Frieren places a flower crown on Himmel's head, wishing her buddy a peaceful and well-deserved afterlife. A few months later, Frieren and her apprentice hit up another town to hunt for spells. When they roll into town, Fern chats with her master about splitting the bills and grabbing the essentials to stay alive. After listing off the must-haves, Fern suddenly remembers all the junk her master has blown their hard-earned cash on in the past, the only legit buy being a magical history book or something. They soon hit an intersection where Frieren splits from her apprentice to grab her stuff. Worried about wasting cash again, Fern tailgates her master all over town until they reach a cute accessory shop, looking all confused. Fern hides behind a fountain and sees this weird look on her master's face. Before she can figure out what that look means, a stray cat strolls up to say hi. After giving the cat some love, Fern looks back and catches her master paying for whatever's in this small box she's holding. Not ready to blow her cover, she follows Frieren into the slums and watches her ask a local dude for a spot that sells good sweets and desserts. Shockingly, the hoodlums are way more polite than she expected as they point her in the right direction to a popular dessert place. The guys even walk Frieren out. Fern keeps on her master's tail until it hits her that she hasn't finished her own shopping. Later that night, Fern shows up at the inn and finds Frieren already there. She says sorry for being late and settles in pretty quick. Not long after, Frieren invites her out on a dessert date, and Fern hesitantly tags along. When they hit the outdoor dessert shop, they get a killer view of the horizon, and Frieren tells Fern to pick whatever she wants since she's been saving up for this. Fern talks about Frieren's fave dessert, Merkur pudding, which brings back memories of the boys when they were younger. Back then, Frieren was bummed for not knowing their favorite food, so they filled her in. Moving on, Frieren pulls out the box from earlier and hands it to Fern, who suddenly remembers it's her birthday. Fern opens the box to find a beautiful hair accessory and thanks Frieren in her own way for the gift and for making an effort to get to know her. The next day, both Frieren and Fern wake up to keep hitting the road for their next adventure. On the way, Fern asks her master what to expect this time, and Frieren says she wants to relive the adventures with Himmel and the crew so those memories don't fade away. Hearing this, Fern finally smiles at Frieren for saying something that makes sense. She teases her master for a bit before clamming up and continuing their journey. When they stumble onto an old plot of land, Frieren decides to give Fern some lessons on defensive magic. After checking out her battle skills, Frieren cranks up the challenge and launches a 360 attack on her. Even though Fern ends up hitting the ground in training, she still picks up a thing or two from her master. After a day of training, the duo hit the road again. While heading to their next stop, they chat about defensive magic and the best conditions for casting it. Frieren realizes that Fern hasn't read the magical history book, so she gives her a hard time, calling her a slowpoke for slacking on her studies. Fern takes the jab in stride and keeps on moving with her master. Soon, they arrive at the next village, where Frieren bumps into someone she knows who takes her to see the spot where the elder sage of corruption, Qual, was sealed. Just to give you the scoop, Qual is a demon who caused major chaos in the area 80 years ago, before hero Himmel and his crew sealed him up. Frieren knows the seal has likely weakened over time, so she's here to finally defeat the demon for good. As they move along, the old man tells Frieren that Himmel used to come to the village every year to check on the seal until he stopped about 30 years ago. Each time he visited, he would call Frieren a bad person for not visiting him at all. Luckily, Frieren didn't forget about the seal and is here to keep her promise and take out the monster. When they reach the seal, Frieren feels it and realizes it's unstable, so she decides to crash for the night and come back the next day to take down Qual. That night, Fern asks her master why she didn't just destroy Qual back then. Frieren explains that he was way too powerful for them to beat. Even as a demon, Qual was known as a strong magician among humans. The hundreds of spells he created back then are still in use today, and they owe it all to him. After throwing out some wild stats about the demon's power, Fern gets anxious and asks her master if she can handle such a foe. Frieren just gets up and asks if Fern really read the magic book. Fern gulps and admits she didn't. Not wanting to waste any more energy chatting, Frieren turns in for the night and gets ready for the big showdown. The next day, Frieren and Fern approach the demon seal, geared up for battle. When the moment comes, Frieren breaks the seal and brings the demon back to life. In the first few moments of his new life, Qual reminisces about his old days with Frieren and asks about the Demon King. When he learns Frieren killed his Demon King, he decides he's out for revenge. He stretches his hand out and casts Zoltrak, the only destructive spell he knows, but is shocked when Fern's defense successfully blocks it. While he's left wondering how Fern managed to block his most powerful attack, Frieren explains how much humans have studied his spell over the decades, developing new spells to counter it. Now, Zoltrak is just an ordinary offensive spell that's no threat to any mage. Realizing this, Qual figures that the defense spell must drain a ton of mana. All he needs to do is ramp up his attack and tire them out. On his next strike, Frieren tells Fern to remember her training and guard her while she does some behind-the-scenes work. For the next few minutes, Qual unleashes all his attack power on Fern, who's blocking every hit. What he doesn't get is that Frieren is already preparing a nasty surprise for him. By the time he notices, it's way too late. She unleashes her attack magic and obliterates him. Qual becomes just a memory, and Frieren heads back to the village to share the good news. There, she sees a weird hat and remembers the old man as the kid who flipped her skirt up years ago. Time flies, she says with a smile, finding it funny how humans live their lives. After getting their reward, she and Fern ride off to continue their journey to the next town, talking like old friends and soaking in the scenery. About a year later, Frieren and Fern hit up the Graz Channel, which is chillin' in the Central Lands. They needed to get some work done and snag some folk magic before they bounced to their next adventure. After messing around in the area for a few days, they finally run into this old dude who takes them to the polluted beach waters and asks for their help to clean it up. For payment, he offers them a fake book that he claims was penned by Flam, the legendary mage. Frieren checks it out and asks if that's the only grimoire in their village. The guy says yup, but she still decides to help him clean up the beach. Fern's curious about why she took the job, and Frieren says it's because she wanted to do this for herself. With that, they dive into the work. A few months later, during the freezing winter, we see Fern heading to the local store to grab some food one morning. When she gets back to their inn room, she's grossed out by the total mess. Turns out, she had just tidied up the place yesterday, but somehow Frieren managed to trash it again before crashing for the night. Annoyed at Frieren's laziness, Fern yanks the book out of Frieren's face to wake her up. After getting her dressed, Fern pushes her master to the beach to keep working. After hitting a milestone, Fern stops to ask if Frieren's always been this tardy and annoying. Frieren apologizes, saying she's never been a morning person. Fern then asks if she ever got into trouble for it, and Frieren admits she did once. They continue piling up the wood, and when they're done, they burn it all and sit down for dinner that night. Their employer checks in on their progress, and Frieren tells him they're almost wrapped up. Then the guy politely asks if they can speed things up so they finish before New Year's, so they can catch the sunrise on day. Frieren just tunes him out and keeps munching on her food. The next morning while working, Fern asks Frieren if she's ever seen a sunrise before. Frieren responds that sunrises aren't her thing. To dodge any more questions, she picks up the pace to finish their tasks quickly. Over the next few weeks, they hustle to get as much done as possible before the new year. After a bunch of exhausting hours hauling and burning debris, they finally wrap things up. On New Year's Eve, they test the water quality, and when they confirm they're done with the work, the old guy visits them that evening and makes Frieren promise to show up for the sunrise the next day. On the way back to the inn, Fern asks Frieren how she plans to wake up early, and Frieren says she'll just pull an all-nighter and crash after the sunrise. That night, Frieren gets nostalgic, thinking back to memories of her friends when they were younger. Super early the next morning, Fern wakes up to find Frieren still snoozing. Before the sun comes up, she drags her master to a popular spot to check out the sunrise. Luckily, the sun shines a gorgeous yellow-red glow on the sea and the town. Frieren gets bored quickly and asks Fern to take her back, but Fern points out that Frieren seems to be enjoying herself, smiling from ear to ear since they got there. Frieren suddenly realizes Fern's right and decides to stick around a bit longer. Soon, she remembers another moment with her friends, from way back when they visited the graves of Isen's family. At the graveyard, Hyder the priest kneels to pray for the fallen souls, wishing them safe passage to heaven. Back then, Isen was skeptical about heaven and argued it was fictional. Thankfully, the priest managed to convince both Isen and Himmel to embrace the idea of heaven and the comfort that comes with believing in it. Nearly 30 years later, Frieren shows up at the same spot with her apprentice, and finds an old and wiggly Isen praying for the same folks again. She stops when she spots the dwarf and asks if she can chill with him. Even though he feels a bit insulted by her boldness, Isen still welcomes Frieren and her apprentice. While sipping tea, Frieren asks Isen what he needs, so she can help. Isen tells her he's been writing to Hyder over the years, so he knows Frieren asked him the same thing long before he passed away. Frieren plays surprised, and Isen remarks that she didn't know this because she never really cared to learn more about them. After exchanging some small talk, Isen takes Frieren to Vol Basin, a place she hadn't seen in ages. Once they get there, Frieren asks why he brought her, and he reveals it's to help him find the real grimoire of the legendary mage Flam. Frieren throws out a few questions and soon figures out that Hyder has been making solid progress in his search for the real deal. They enter a huge forest packed with thick vegetation where the Viking dwarf tells them to look for a big tree. After some random chatter, they finally get to searching for the tree. This time, Frieren keeps Fern's feelings in mind and pushes Isen to hurry up so Fern doesn't get too mad at her, which makes Isen chuckle a bit. A few weeks later, after searching everywhere for the big tree, they finally make some progress. While chasing their lead, Worried, Frieren asks Aizen why he's so determined to find the grimoire, and he says he feels sorry for her. When she asks him to explain, Aizen recalls how sad she was at Himmel's funeral, wishing she could have known him better. So, to help her chat with Himmel's spirit, he's on a mission to find notes from Flam that explain how to communicate with the dead, since Flam had written the procedure in those notes. Frieren tells Aizen she doesn't care about seeing Himmel now, and claims those texts are just fairy tales. Aizen laughs and tells her that all magic spells started as fairy tales too, so there's nothing to be worried about. Besides, he's already discussed their plan with Hyder, and they came up with it together. The best she can do right now is honor that plan. When they finally reach the large tree, Frieren gets close and remembers when Flam planted it. It's been 1,000 years since that day when Frieren was still a teenager. Flam planted that tree to grow around her house and keep her book of knowledge safe from prying eyes. Before leaving, Flam tells Frieren that one day she'll want to come back and retrieve that book. Now that they're there, Frieren uses her magic to unlock the shield so she can access the room beyond the big tree. Fern is a bit shocked to see Frieren acting so familiar with the place, but when Aizen tells her that Frieren was once Flam's student, she stays quiet. While checking out the book, she discovers a place called Oriole that Flam said was in the northernmost part of the continent. Flam talked about how she found and communicated with the souls of several dead friends and wished Frieren could see such a place. Fern gets curious about it and asks her master to check where it is. Frieren looks it up and realizes it's in Ende, which just happens to be where the Demon King's castle is located. Frieren is feeling a bit unsure about making the trip, but Aizen gets her to promise she'll go see Himmel. Once that's settled, Frieren and Aizen head out from the Central Lands to the Demon King's castle. On their way, Frieren falls asleep and starts mumbling about how cold the northern areas are. Fern gets worried and asks Aizen, the dwarf, to explain why Frieren is so spooked about it. Aizen tells her that the far north is still freezing, so they should gear up for it. Fern bites her tongue and keeps going until she gets fed up with Frieren being all lazy. Eventually, Aizen asks her how Frieren is as a master, and Fern shares all the odd stuff she's seen on their journey together. In the end, she calls Frieren a weird person who doesn't seem to enjoy much of anything. After hearing Fern's take on Frieren, Aizen thinks back to when they first saw that meteor shower. Before Hyder interrupted the gloomy chat, Himmel and Aizen were trying to get Frieren to take on an apprentice so she wouldn't get bored on her travels. Aizen figures Frieren must be a good mentor before they head back to his place to chill. After saying goodbye to the old dwarf, Aizen wishes Frieren luck on her journey since it's going to take a while. Frieren stops to think about her last visit to a place like that. When she's done, she turns to Fern and tells her their journey will only take 10 years. As Fern and her master start their journey, she takes a moment to remember the last time she had a good chat with Hyder before he passed away. Back then, Hyder was trying to get Fern to behave while under Free's guidance, joking that he'd haunt her if she didn't. Once Fern figured out his tricks, she fired back and made the old guy laugh. As that great memory fades, Fern wakes up resting on Frieren's shoulders. Noticing her apprentice is awake, Frieren tells her to stay sharp since they're arriving at their next stop, the Willy region in the Central Lands. Fern gets it together, and soon they arrive in town to relax. A few minutes later, they pop into a store to stock up on supplies. The lady working there warns them about spooky ghosts haunting the mountain pass they'll have to cross after leaving town. Frieren's curiosity kicks in, and she asks for more info on the ghosts, thinking they might just be undead monsters or something. The woman tells her to ask the locals for more details. Before heading back to the inn, Frieren chats with some townsfolk to gather more information about the ghosts in the mountain pass. They discover that these ghosts are actually loved ones, trying desperately to reconnect with the living. Once they get to the inn, Frieren breaks down how the undead work, telling Fern they're just corpses controlled by magic. But these ghosts look nothing like typical undead. As they settle into their room, Frieren seems scared about what she thinks the monster might look like, and urges Fern not to waste time trying to figure it out. Before bed, Frieren plans for them to leave the village the next day, but Fern convinces her to stay and help out. The next morning, the two head out to the mountain pass to check out the ghost sightings. When they get to the spot where people have been disappearing, Fern goes on high alert and tells her master about the illusions monsters use to trap people. Frieren recognizes a specific monster that's good at using that magic and names it Einsam. This greedy, crafty monster only eats humans by creating phantoms that look like the victim's dead relatives to lure them into its den. Luckily, mages have an easy time with it since they can blast it away with high mana spells. Frieren asks Fern if she can really shoot down an apparition of someone like Hyder without feeling guilty. Fern reassures her not to worry, so they keep moving. Eventually, the atmosphere shifts to a dark, foggy landscape. They get ready to face any phantoms that show up. Just moments later, Hyder's ghost appears behind Fern, calling out to her. She turns to see his ghost, but freezes up just as she's about to shoot it down, captivated by the sweet words from a cherished memory with him. Figuring out what's going on, Frieren prepares to take out Hyder herself. As she's about to, Himmel shows up too. Unfazed by the creepy ghost, Frieren tells Himmel to say what he needs to say, and he tells her to shoot him. She does it without missing a beat, pushing Fern to follow suit. Once they finish shooting, Fern breaks down a bit, snapping back to reality. Frieren tells her to stay calm for when they face the real Hyder and Oriole. Hearing this, Fern regains her composure and continues to follow her master. After traveling for a few more hours, the duo finally made it to Regal Canyon, right in the heart of the land. They ducked out of sight when they spotted a red fire dragon snoozing in its nest. Frieren checked out the pile of junk the wild dragon had swiped from past adventurers, and then noticed a grimoire, instantly getting super interested in snagging it. But first, they had to deal with the dragon one way or another. For their first attempt, Frieren had Fern blast the dragon with a basic attack spell. When that didn't work and the dragon woke up, Frieren ditched Fern, leaving her to face the dragon solo. It didn't take long for Fern to realize just how dangerous that dragon was, and she soon bolted to meet up with her master in a safer spot. After some serious thinking, they decided they needed a buddy. That night, they tracked down Eisen and talked things over with him. Eisen suggested they find his old apprentice, Stark, who now lived in a village nearby the canyon. When Frieren asked Eisen if this guy was any good in a fight, he clammed up. The next day, they finally got to the village and quietly looked for the dude. Along the way, Fern brought up the grimoire in the dragon's nest, and Frieren explained that it had a spell that could see through people's clothes. As they debated the spell's usefulness, a grandma popped up and let them know that Stark was looking for them. On their way to Stark's hideout, the woman shared the backstory of the hero, Stark. Apparently, the dragon had attacked the village 3 years ago and left after a long standoff with Stark, who had just appeared out of nowhere. After hearing such an epic tale, Frieren and Fern felt hopeful about Mr. Stark. When they finally reached his training spot, they found the spunky redhead trying to show off a scar from an earlier fight. Once he realized Frieren's identity, he got serious and asked if his master had sent them to drag him back. Frieren told him she needed him to be their frontliner in taking down the solar red dragon together. Before saying yes, Stark asked Frieren why she wanted that grimoire so much. She explained it was because a friend complimented the spells she used to collect, which sounded pretty absurd to Stark, but then he agreed to help, only to ask Frieren if she could take on the dragon. She told him if he could keep the dragon busy for 30 seconds, she could whip up a spell strong enough to take it down. Stark then asked why he had to do that. At this point, Frieren just wanted to know if he had any experience fighting monsters. Stark dropped the tough guy act and broke down in tears, begging Frieren to save his sorry life. According to him, he got super lucky 3 years ago when he was frozen until the dragon decided to bail. Shortly after, the villagers started treating him like a hero. Fern was totally disgusted by his display of cowardice and urged her master to drop this loser. However, Frieren just walked over to check out the crevice in the mountain behind Stark. After feeling around for a bit, she left and told Stark to get it together. Later that night, Frieren and Fern chatted about Stark's so-called heroism with the pub owners. When Fern got a bit too cocky with her jabs, Frieren reminded her how pathetic she had been in her first fight against monsters. Fern shut up and finished her food. Soon after, Frieren headed to the inn and told Fern to check on the goofball before hitting the hay. While Fern was on her way, Frieren thought back to her chat with Eisen a few weeks ago and finally pieced together the poor dude's backstory. As for Fern, she arrived at Stark's training grounds only to find him trying to widen the crack in the mountain as he kept on training. She called him out in disbelief, and Stark just stared back at her. When she finally comes to her senses, she asks the guy why he's training so hard when he's all about not fighting the dragon. Stark starts rambling again, saying he's just putting on a show because the villagers think his presence is what's keeping the dragon from attacking. Fern chimes in, asking him what he plans to do if the dragon actually shows up. Stark says he'll have to defend the village when that day comes, but he also admits he might just run away. As for the scar on his forehead, he explains that he got it from his master, not the dragon, when Eisen was let down by him. Fern takes his rough hand and tells him she believes he'll stick around if the dragon attacks. Stark gets a bit awkward and asks if she's trying to get cheesy. Fern explains by sharing her first monster encounter and how she dealt with it. Frieren left her to handle everything alone, and for the first half of the fight, she was just running for her life. Eventually, she found the guts to face the monster and take it down in no time. After this, Fern tells Stark that his determination to protect the village is real, and that's enough to take on 10 solar red dragons if needed. Once she leaves, Stark thinks about what Fern said and decides to strengthen his resolve. Fern heads back to the inn and fills her master in on her meeting with Stark. The next day, they return to Stark's training spot but are disappointed to find him missing. After trying to get Fern to play tag with a dragon, Stark finally shows up to get to business. Before diving into the dragon fight, Frieren asks Stark why he cares about the village so much. Stark says it's because he really likes the people there after 3 years and would do anything to protect them. Once they hear this, the trio moves to the dragon's nest. Frieren notices Stark's hands are shaking and chuckles a bit. When Stark makes a fuss about it, Frieren laughs because that's exactly how his master felt before facing a big enemy. With that, Stark steps forward and finds himself in front of the dragon, unsure of what to do. He knows he has to keep the monster occupied for 30 seconds, so he gathers his courage to confront his fears and fight the dragon. As he gets closer, he understands something about his master and realizes it's okay to be scared as long as you're ready to face your fears. Eventually, the battle kicks off, and Frieren quickly understands why Eisen hit his student back then. It turns out Eisen wasn't disappointed or angry. He was scared of how much power Stark had, so much that his body just reacted and hit the kid. Eisen sees how strong Stark could be in the future future and becomes really hopeful about his growth. Once Stark is deep in the fight, he does everything he can to defend against the dragon's attacks. When he gets a chance, Stark lands a heavy blow that brings the dragon down. With 30 seconds past, Stark yells at Frieren, telling her to attack the dragon. Frieren, who already knows the dragon is done for, doesn't do anything and only tells him after he keeps throwing insults. A few minutes later, the girls come down to thank Stark for taking care of the dragon. Shortly after, Frieren and her apprentice go to check out the pile of junk the dragon left behind. There, Stark talks about what his master told him about the elf sifting through the trash in front of him. Frieren remembers a night when she made shaved ice with one of her magic tricks to impress her travel buddies. While Aizen didn't get the point of such a pointless trick, Himmel the hero thought differently. The next day, Stark waves goodbye to the village and sets off with the girls after snagging their rewards for defeating the dragon. They travel a bit further and pause to use a spell from the grimoire. Fern gets a little cheeky checking Stark's nuts but is bummed when she sees how small they are. Eventually, they ask him what his next move is, and Stark says he's down to journey with them. After a few more days on the road, they hit the fortress city of Wall. Once they arrive, they meet the massive guardian at the northern checkpoint, who won't let them through because he thinks the northern lands are too risky for them. He gets called away to the Castellan's house and warns Frieren and the kids to stay safe and behave before heading out. Once he's gone, Frieren and the crew explore the town and hang out for a while, which could be for a few years before they get through the checkpoint. Stark and Fern exchange surprised glances at Frieren's chill attitude. Once she's off doing her thing, the duo splits up to enjoy the city. Stark heads to the nearest restaurant for some delicious jumbo eats, which he whines about a bit. Not long after, Fern walks in to join him, ordering a glass of milk and sitting next to him. Stark asks why she looks so annoyed, and Fern starts questioning him if he's cool with waiting 2 years for the checkpoint gates to open. When Stark says no, she pushes him to come with her to find an easy way out of town. Outside, Stark suggests flying over the big wall, but there's a barrier blocking that idea. In the following scenes, they ask villagers and locals for any tips. When they hit a dead end, Fern gives up, but not Stark. He suggests checking with some black market folks for info about the checkpoint gates. Fern jumps on this plan and starts asking every shady character they see in the slums. After hours of asking for help, they're still empty-handed. Stark decides to hit the guard station next, with nothing to lose. Before they get there, Fern asks why he's so eager to get past the checkpoint. Stark explains he doesn't have much time. When Fern asks what he means, he says he needs to get back to share wild stories of his adventures with Fern and Frieren with his old, sickly master. He feels that's the only way to repay his master for looking after him, and if he takes too long, Aizen might kick the bucket before he can say thanks. Fern thinks about this and gets back to searching. After wandering the city a bit more, Fern finally spots Frieren trying to keep a low profile. Stark immediately starts questioning her, suspecting she's in trouble again. This time, Frieren says she's just been shopping, and they happen to follow her. Just then, the earlier guard shows up and kneels to apologize to Frieren for being rude before. Shortly after, the Castellan arrives to pay his respects too. It turns out the village really respects the elf, so they give her a smooth pass through the checkpoint gates to reach the northern lands without any issues. Next, the villagers line up to watch Frieren's visit, and while she isn't too keen on the special treatment, she has no choice but to go along with it. As they leave the village for the northern lands, Frieren wishes she had more time to learn about the village's magic. During their travels to their first town in the northern lands, Frieren finds herself dreaming about her time with the heroes during their 10-year adventure. Back then, Frieren had just gotten a knockoff grimoire of the Great Mage Flam, and was complaining about how wild people can get when they're trying to scam others. After dreaming for a few hours, she wakes up and sees her buddies, Fern and Stark, getting breakfast ready for all of them. Fern's the first to notice her up and is shocked that Frieren could wake up so early. Before Frieren drifts back to sleep, Fern quickly massages her and feeds her some breakfast, so she'll be wide awake and ready to continue their journey to the first settlement in the northern lands. When they reach Road, in the northern lands, Frieren and her crew stop to help clear a landslide blocking the path to the nearest town. A traveler who asked for their help stands by and watches them do their thing. While they work, the man makes sure to thank them a ton for their help. At one point, Stark gets tired and asks Frieren why they can't just use magic to move the man's caravan past the landslide. Frieren explains that if they did that, the other travelers would end up trapped, just like this guy. Stark gets it and doesn't say another word until they're halfway done clearing the rocks. Soon, they ask the man why landslides happen in the area, and the old man says it's due to the constant wars with demons. Stark nods in agreement and then gets into some playful banter with lovely Fern, who keeps calling him Mr. Stark. After settling their little squabble, they finish up the work and follow the old man to his town to rest for a few days. On their way, the old man is amazed to discover Frieren is an elf since he's never seen one before. Frieren explains how her kind feels indifferent about reproduction and enjoys being alone. When they reach the town's gates, they find the place busier than usual. The old man tells them the town is gearing up for the Liberation Festival, a celebration culmination of the day, Himmel and his group of heroes defeated the Demon King. Frieren isn't keen on revealing her identity, so she just keeps asking weird questions about that day. Eventually, she recalls another memory of Himmel being a jerk, while giving genuine reasons for wanting statues made in their honor. Frieren didn't care about them back then, but Himmel wanted those statues up so she wouldn't feel lonely when they were all gone. That night, Frieren and her crew get to see the statues decorated in the town's honor. After babbling on about traditions and stuff, they hit the hay and leave town the next day. Before they get too far, Stark asks Frieren where they're headed, and she tells him heaven. Hearing that, he just goes quiet. A few weeks later, the trio arrives in Graf Granat's domain, also located in the northern lands. At first, Frieren feels the town is pretty normal, until she senses something off demon magic. Suddenly, she readies her staff, pointing at where the demon magic is coming from. Just then, 3 demons appear from the gate up ahead with Graf Granat, and Frieren is ready to take one out. Luckily, the guards manage to stop her before things escalate. Soon, Graf and the so-called demon peace envoy, Lord Lugner, approach to size up this imposter. Lugner asks Graf to confirm he didn't send the assassin after him. Granat assures him that Frieren is acting on her own. Lugner believes him and bends down to inspect his new foe. After a little aggressive back and forth with the mage, Graf has the guards toss Frieren into the dungeon for now. Hours later, Stark and Fern check in on their master down in the dungeon. They break the news that she's been sentenced to 2 years in the slammer, and Frieren just shrugs it off like it's no big deal. When they finally get to the real topic, Fern asks if Frieren knows about Aura the Guillotine, and Frieren mentions that the demon is one of the 7 sages of destruction who served the Demon King. Fern goes on to explain that this demon's been battling the town forever since regaining her powers and hasn't come across anyone strong enough to take her down. After all this time, they're hoping to strike up a peace deal. Frieren rolls her eyes at the demon's obvious attempt to undermine the town from the inside. But when Stark doesn't believe the demons have hidden agendas, Frieren decides it's time to school him on how serious a threat these demons can be. She shares a story from her last run-in with demons back when she was hanging with Himmel and the crew about 80 years ago. One night, the whole village cornered and shunned a demon child for munching on the daughters of one of the locals. When it came time to finish off the demon, Himmel hesitated because the kid looked cute. Frieren, tired of all the drama, stepped up to take the little brat out, but then the village chief, who's a total fool, showed mercy and took the demon boy in, thinking he could turn him good. Turns out, that was a huge mistake, because later on, the demon boy flipped the script and killed the chief, so he could replace the daughter he gobbled up with the chief's own kid. When Himmel and the others found out, they had no trouble putting an end to the demon. Even in his last moments, the demon still tried to mess with the humans' heads, and Frieren asked why. The demon replied that humans teach them to use words as tools for deception. After her story, Frieren lays out the truth for her crew, and pushes them to keep investigating. The next day, Lugner and his 2 lackeys kick back, waiting for Graf Granat to show for their meeting. While they're hanging out, they chat about that weird mage who popped up in town yesterday. Lugner is pretty sure he's seen her before but can't quite place her. Meanwhile, Frieren senses trouble brewing in the town and figures she might need to bolt from prison when chaos kicks off. When Graf finally arrives, he takes the demons to his late son's room and shows them the sword his son proudly fought with before getting taken down by Aura a decade ago. After sharing some more about his son, Graf turns on Lugner and threatens him. Lugner scans the room and plays the family card, telling Graf that his own dad was killed in the same battle, which is why he's there trying to negotiate peace. Hearing this, Graf softens up and decides to lead them to the meeting room. On the way, Liney, one of his subordinates, asks what a father is, and Lugner admits he doesn't know. At the balcony, he tells her to wait until they get to Graf and to persuade him to lower the town's defenses so Lady Aura can snack on the humans there. When he asks about the other lackey, Drott, Liney says the idiot went off to deal with some hindrance. Just then, Drott pops up in the dungeons, takes out the guard on duty, and finds himself face to face with Frieren in her cell. The idiot thinks Frieren is an easy target he can take down. Frieren gives him a fair warning that she's tougher than he thinks, but of course, he doesn't listen. Before showing off his secret magic wires, Drott asks Frieren who she thinks she is. Frieren claims she's stronger than Aura the Guillotine, and Drott just laughs, thinking she's bluffing. But then, he reveals his killer wires wrapped around her neck and lifts her into the air. Frieren, already anticipating this, gathers mana around her neck to block the wire from slicing through. Drott gives her props for her quick thinking, noting that a typical mage would have freaked out by now. Then, he tightens the grip of the wire, aiming to cut through both her mana and her head at the same time. Frieren rolls her eyes at his smugness, thinking he could take her down with just that. But before Drott can finish a thought, Frieren slices off one of his arms. In a flash, her hands find their way to his neck. He begs for mercy, but she ends him before he can even get those words out. After taking down one demon, Frieren knows she needs to report this to Graf, so he's aware of the other 2. But when she steps outside the dungeon, she finds the headless guard and makes a run for it before anyone realizes she's escaped. Meanwhile, Fern and Stark are chilling over a big lunch at some random restaurant in town. When they finish eating, Fern jumps up and tells Stark to follow her to the palace to directly ask Graf to free Frieren. If they can get her out in time, maybe they can handle those annoying demons before they wipe out the town. But before they even move, Stark takes a moment to acknowledge how strong that demon, Lugner, is. He remembers how he and Fern never even got a look from him when they first met, and it freaks him out so much that he starts shaking and spills his drink. As he cleans up the mess, he warns Fern to be careful of those demons, since they're probably with Graf right now. Fern doesn't see a problem with that, and urges Stark to hurry up so they can get there fast. Right after Drott goes down, Liney and Lugner notice his mana fading. Instead of getting mad, they wonder who that super powerful mage is. Lugner feels like he's seen her before, but can't place her. Before they can figure it out, Graf bursts into the room with his men, accusing them of sending Drott to take out their guard behind their backs. Lugner tries to deny it, but all signs point to Drott, who isn't around to defend himself. Graf knows Frieren is a strong mage, and wouldn't attack a guard. With nothing left to lose, Graf orders his men to surround Lugner and Liney. Soon, swords are drawn, and Graf demands Lugner produce his man to clear things up. Frustrated, Lugner decides to take matters into his own hands. Without hesitation, he slices his own skin and uses magic to turn his blood into a long, sharp blade, which he uses to take down all the soldiers except Graf. After disposing of them, he turns to Graf and engages him in a short fight before stopping to explain what words mean to demons. Then he triggers Graf by trash-talking his son's memory before stabbing himself with Graf's own sword and plunging it into Graf's torso with that magic blood blade. With Graf wounded, Lugner has now taken control of the castle. He halts the fight immediately and locks Graf up until he reveals how to break the barrier protecting the town. That evening, Fern and Stark spot Frieren walking through the town square with her cloak pulled over her head. They recognize her right away and follow her to a hidden spot to chat. Frieren fills them in on everything that went down in the cell, including the guard Drott put down. She asks for their take on things. Fern responds logically and pleads with Frieren not to ditch them in town. Frieren grins and reassures them not to sweat those two losers since they're not as tough as they think. With that, she turns away from her friends and heads off to tackle her next mission. Before she can get too far, Stark drops to his knees, begging to stay behind, but Fern is so embarrassed by his antics that she yanks him back into town. Not long after, Frieren uses her long-range magic detection skill to scope out the country for any big mana sources. She soon picks up on one about 10 kilometers away from the town and realizes that Aura, the guillotine, one of the 7 mages of destruction, is hiding her army right under everyone's nose. Frieren smiles at the chance to face a serious opponent, hoping Aura will be worth her while. Later that night, Stark and Fern sneak into the mansion under the cover of darkness to find Graf and take out the peace envoys. They check a few shadowy rooms and manage to enter the mansion through an open window. While they're creeping around, they spot Lugner on one of the upper floors with Liney and a wounded Graf tied to a chair. Before he starts torturing the poor guy, he explains the concept of magic and how demons have banded together to create spells that outsmart humans. He goes on to recognize geniuses like Flam, the legendary mage, cursing people like her for building barriers like the one around the town that's held strong over time. He grumbles that if it weren't for her, they'd have wrapped this up way before now. Now that he's got Graf in his clutches, Lugner demands Granat teach him how to break the town's barrier. He gives Granat one last chance to spill the beans on where the grimoire to undo the spell is, but Granat stays tight-lipped. Fed up with the silence, Lugner leaves him to ponder his options and continues searching the mansion for the grimoire with Liney. Once he's gone, Stark sneaks into the room where Granat is locked up to rescue him. Just as he's about to untie the guy, Stark starts shaking with nerves, and Granat notices. They have a quick chat until Stark manages to steady himself and frantically tries to cut the tough rope. Granat soon loses hope and tells Stark to take his necklace to show the guard so he can start getting the citizens out. Stark gets to his feet, pulls out his axe, and readies himself to smash the fancy chair to save Greynet. Just then, Lugner and Liney show up, catching Stark shaking in fear. Granat denies knowing Stark, and Lugner gives him a chance to get out now before it's game over. Stark gets mad at Lugner for underestimating him and lashes out. Lugner accepts the challenge and injures Stark's arms before he knows what hit him. After pinning Stark down, Lugner calls him a fool for trying to take them on alone. At that moment, Stark calls for Fern, and she shows up with a surprise attack that blasts a hole right through Lugner's chest. Stunned by how well Fern can control her mana, Lugner struggles to process what just happened. He asks her what spell she just used, and she casually mentions it's just Zoltrat. Lugner gets furious and tells her to stop messing around. He pushes for more info on how she learned the spell, but Fern doesn't engage. Before round 2 kicks off, Fern and Stark bail out with Granite and get him to safety. After they leave, Lugner informs Liney that his blood is on those two, so they can't afford to lose track of them. He then discusses the new spell with Liney and remembers the exact mage who hit him with that spell ages ago, Frieren. In that moment, Lugner finally figures out who the mysterious mage is. He thinks of Frieren as the slayer of demons and a genius he can't stand. Meanwhile, Frieren catches up to Aura to confront her army. While Stark and Fern take Granat to a local church to get him treated, Granat thanks them for saving him and promises to forgive their mage buddy for rescuing them from the demon's tricks. Fern tries to explain that Frieren didn't kill the guard, and Granat admits he knows that. More importantly, when he hears Frieren's name, he feels pretty dumb for disrespecting her and locking her up in the dungeon. Granat then tells them that it was Frieren and the heroes from his grandfather's time who drove Aura and the Demon King away from their village, giving them around 60 years of peace and good times. Now that Aura's way stronger, anyone who tries to go up against her is in for a world of hurt. At that moment, Frieren runs into Aura, her old frenemy, and politely asks her to crawl back to wherever she came from and leave the town alone. Naturally, Aura's not just gonna back down, so she sends some of her undead soldiers to take on Frieren. Frieren easily defends herself against the soldiers, and soon finds herself surrounded by Aura's puppets. After a quick catch-up with her old pal, Frieren recognizes some armor on the puppets and makes up her mind to take down Aura for good. In response, Aura brings out her secret weapon, the Scales of Obedience. Back at the church, Granat explains what Aura's special weapon does. The Scale of Obedience gets activated when Aura places her soul and her enemies on either side and waits for the scales to tip based on who has more mana. The one with less mana gets forced to obey her forever. It's a super risky weapon, but with Aura's 500 years of life, she's got one of the biggest mana reserves in history. She's never lost the bet, not even once. To wrap it up, Granat warns the adventurers never to underestimate the magic skills of the 7 Sages of Destruction. After hearing him ramble, Fern asks if there's a way to counter it. Granat explains that while the scales are fair, no one's had as much mana as Aura in the last 500 years since she became a Sage of Destruction. Fern then asks if there's a way to fight it, and Granat says there is. Apparently, if a soldier with a strong will gets caught in the trap, they can resist the obedience spell temporarily before eventually getting taken over. During that brief time, Aura would struggle to control them. If she finally gets control, she'll dispose of them afterward. Meanwhile, Frieren starts getting overwhelmed by the sheer number of zombies, so she uses a big chunk of her mana to break the magic, putting them under Aura's control. This surprises Aura, who asks Frieren why she didn't use flashy spells to wipe them out like she did 80 years ago. Frieren replies it's because Himmel scolded her for it. Aura tells her she's free to do whatever now that Himmel is gone, and Frieren takes that to heart. She stands up and decides to take out the demons without holding back. Stark gets dressed after making sure Graf is taken care of, so he can head out and track down the demons. Fern warns him not to get too cocky because those demons can be seriously tough. But Stark says someone has to step up and stop them, so he's off to do what he needs to do. Fern gets inspired and wants to tag along, but Stark tells her to focus on getting the townsfolk to safety while he looks for Frieren and urges her to come help them take down the demons. They agree on this and get ready to split up. Before they part ways, Fern spots the blood on Stark's arms and freaks out a bit. Stark teases her back, pointing out the blood stain on her robe and asking about it. She quickly realizes there's mana in the blood and chucks the robe. Just as she's about to take off Stark's robe, Lugner and Liney sneak attack them. Lugner stabs Fern and pins her against the wall, while Liney slams Stark down with an axe. After the first hit, Stark gets back up and recognizes Liney's move as one of Eisen's techniques. Meanwhile, Lugner talks for a bit before getting to the point. Fern plays along, letting him ask her a few questions to stall. Lugner underestimates her and shifts to asking about Stark's strength. Fern tells him Stark's Eisen's top student, but Lugner brushes him off even more. Then he asks where Frieren is, and Fern says Frieren bolted because he killed a guard. Before firing off another question, Lugner steps back to think. He finally figures Frieren must have run to hunt down and take out Aura. While he's distracted, Fern grabs her staff, breaks free from Lugner's hold, and threatens him. After calling him out for being a proud jerk, she warns Lugner she'll put a hole in his chest. Lugner dares her to try, claiming he'll have her head flying off before she gets close. Right before they clash, Fern remembers asking Frieren about her magic strength on an otherwise normal day when they had just taken down a bunch of demon horses. Frieren had mentioned her speed in casting spells, which is why she usually made Fern handle the demon cleanups. Just before things get tense, there's an awkward silence. Then, in a flash, both Fern and Lugner launch into an attack and defense at lightning speed. From the exchange, Fern spots Lugner's weak Spothus heart. With that in mind, they dive into their battle. Meanwhile, Liney stands over Stark's unconscious body, thinking she's done with the fight. Just then, Stark gets back on his feet and tells her not to feel too satisfied. Yeth's still in the game. Liney readies herself and goes back on the attack. Meanwhile, Lugner and Fern are going all out against each other. After taking a ton of hits from Fern, Lugner finally admits that she's got some serious skills and curses Frieren for teaching her to be a proper mage. To take her down, he plans to keep attacking until she runs out of mana. What he doesn't realize is that Fern has way more mana in her tank than he ever thought. For the next few minutes, he takes her relentless barrage of attacks until he's forced to call Liney for backup. On the flip side, Liney keeps the pressure on as Stark tries to defend against her strikes. They hit a stalemate, and Stark asks her how she's so good at copying others' techniques. Liney gives him a quick rundown while still battling him and manages to pin him down again. Without letting him catch his breath, she keeps attacking, cornering him even more. Stark ramps up his defense until he finally loses his cool and gets hit on the shoulder by one of Liney's attacks. Before he throws in the towel, he remembers a lesson from his master, Eisen, who taught him that losing is just a perspective for a warrior, and as long as he stands to fight, he can never really lose. Knowing he still has some fight left in him, Stark stands back up and realizes that his master's hits were lighter than he thought. He faces Liney one more time and lets her land a cut on his belly with her imitation axe. At the same time, Lugner and Fern expand their attack range, while Liney slices through Stark's wide-open defense. Now that she's stepped right into his trap, Stark unleashes his lightning strike to take her out. Lugner notices something's off with Liney's mana and gets momentarily distracted. Fern seizes that moment to hit Lugner with a Zoltrax spell, blasting another hole in his chest, and this time, yanking his heart out with the attack. Before diving back into the main story, we get a flashback to Frierin's early days with her master, Flam, 1,000 years ago. After being saved from death by the legendary mage, young Frierin is seen wandering the woods with Flam, chatting about the dishonor of deceiving demons. Flam brings up that jerk Basalt who wrecked her elven village and explains that demons are all scumbags who don't care about honor or fairness. So, why should she, a human, play by their rules? If being called a disgrace to humanity means outsmarting demons and taking them down before they catch on, then she's all in. After getting nailed by a deadly attack to the heart, Lugner just sits there, accepting his fate. Right before Fern finishes him off, she asks about Frierin's fight with the so-called Lady Aura. Lugner isn't sweating it because he thinks Frierin is gonna lose. When Fern asks why, he says it's because Lady Aura has tons more mana than anyone else in the demon army. Lugner underestimates Frierin and tells Fern she'll lose if Aura weighs their souls based on obedience. Fern snaps back, saying her master is crafty and will figure out a way to outsmart Aura and her dumb tricks. Lugner starts to feel something is off since Fern keeps attacking him despite her weak mana output. Suddenly, it clicks for him, and he realizes the trick behind Fern and Frierin's low mana levels. But before he can say anything, Fern takes him out. In the next scene, the flashback to Frierin's early life continues, showcasing the first time Flam met Frierin. Flam had stumbled upon a destroyed elven village and discovered it was attacked by demons led by Basalt the Throne. She then finds a teenage elven mage who had tons of mana and managed to defeat the great general, but the battles have left her in terrible shape. Flam is annoyed by Frierin's reckless attempt to fight openly and show all her tricks. Just when Flam decides to leave her to her fate, Frierin speaks up, saying she knows just how powerful Flam is, so she should stop hiding. Flam, impressed by her insight, decides to take her on as a student. She carries the wounded elf out of the burning village after learning her name. On their way to Flam's place, Frierin asks her to explain what happened to the village. Flam tells her there's no village left, so there's no one to worry about. Frierin asks to be put down so she can go on her way, but Flam says no. Instead, she tells Frierin she's going to be her new student, so she better get used to it. Shortly after, Flam senses 3 demon mages chasing them and stops to face them. When the mages show up, they demand that Flam surrender the girl and scram. Flam puts Frierin down and gives her first lesson. She explains how foolish and overconfident the demons can get when their magic is questioned. Having lived among them as a powerful mage, Flam knows a trick to catch them off guard. Just when they think they've got it all made, Flam unleashes a quick attack that wipes them out in an instant. After that, she turns to Frierin and explains how she did it. Frierin figures out the trick and tells Flam she knows she hides her immense mana by controlling her output to make others think she's just a weakling. Flam acknowledges her insight and takes her back to her house in the woods. A few days later, Flam starts training Frieren after patching up her wounds. As they head to the fields, she shares her lifestyle with the excited young elf. Once they reach the fields, Flam has Frieren tone down her mana release to just 1/10 of what it usually is. Once she gets the hang of that, she'll pump up her mana reserves a ton. While starting her training, Frieren asks her teacher how long they'll do this. Flam smiles, saying they'll spend their whole lives tricking demons into underestimating them so they can catch them off guard. Right now, Frieren faces Aura and her undead army, mana barely leaking out. Aura starts chit-chatting about Lugner and the other 2 losers kicking the bucket. When it's go time, she challenges Frieren to wager her soul on obedience to see whose mana reigns supreme. Frieren takes her time analyzing the massive mana draining from Aura, but then she pushes aside the info overload as Aura kicks off the ritual. Before anything unfolds, we flash back to Frieren and her master gathering supplies in another town. Somewhere along the way, Frieren asks Flam why demons can't hide their mana like they do. Flam explains it's because demons are all about their own stuff and don't care about rules or order. To clarify, she goes into the deep love-hate vibe humans have for wealth and power, letting Frieren know that demons see mana the same way. Sometimes they hold back their mana for stealth, but none are dumb enough to suppress it all the time doing that would mess with their status, and that's a major no-no. After breaking it all down, Flam tells Frieren she's lucky to be an elf and not a demon. After 3 years of keeping her mana in check, she's still nailing it without stress. Frieren says it's all thanks to her awesome master. Fast forward 50 years in the flashback, and Flam's really wrinkled and old. One evening, she finds her apprentice practicing magic, just like always. She asks if Frieren still loves magic as she did back in the day. Frieren says yes, and Flam warns her to stay under the radar until she finally takes down the Demon King. Right after, she asks Frieren to plant flowers around her grave when she's gone, and Frieren learns a flower spell on the spot. Years later, Flam finally passes away, and Frieren keeps her dying wish. After burying her master, Frieren continues her life, living like a background character, training when she can and soaking up knowledge. Hundreds of years later, Himmel, Eisen, and the clueless Hyder meet her for the first time. It's a weird encounter since Frieren tries to shoo them away, but after a lot of convincing from the hero, she finally agrees to join them on their Demon King date. The rest, as they say, is history. Back to the present, Aura weighs her soul against Frieren's, grinning like she won. Frieren notices Aura's smug expression and asks why she's so chipper. Aura brushes her off and starts trash-talking Frieren's super low mana. When the souls hit the scale and Aura sees her soul outweighing Frieren's, she gets too cocky and creeps up on Frieren with a sword, ready to chop her head off. Suddenly, the scales start tipping in Frieren's favor. Realizing this, Frieren tells Aura she seriously misread the situation. After training for nearly 1,000 years, holding back her mana mana has become second nature, so there's no way a 500-year-old demon would catch her bluff. In one swift move, Frieren unleashes her enormous mana reserves, making Aura realize just how foolish she was to think she could outsmart her. As the scales tip in Frieren's favor, she turns to head home, casually ordering Aura to take herself out. Unable to disobey, Aura does the unthinkable, wondering where it all went wrong. By morning, Fern makes her way to Aura's last battlefield and finds her master paying respects to the fallen soldiers freed from Aura's deadly zombie grip. Noting the eerie scene, Fern calmly approaches her master and asks if she finally defeated Aura, to which Frieren replies with a yes. Shortly after, Graf and Stark show up, and Frieren tries to make a run for it. Luckily, Graf had already given her a pardon, so Frieren is still in the clear. Moving on, Graf gets closer to the armor of the zombie soldiers, and thanks Frieren for showing them respect. A moment later, he inspects the armor of the fallen, while Frieren and her buddies reminisce about the good old days with Himmel, who used to scold her for using flashy spells. After sharing enough memories, she compliments Fern and Stark for taking down Lugner and his partner, Liney, all on their own. Stark and Fern try to downplay it, but before it goes further, Granat and his crew discover the armor of his long-dead son, with the Granat family crest necklace still resting on his shoulders. Granat pays his final respects to his son and heads back to his hometown. Days later, Granat finally meets with Frieren and her team to talk rewards. While Granat was out doing great things for them, he couldn't wrap his head around why Frieren only asked for the grimoire for their defensive barriers and such. Frieren explains that she's into collecting spells and grimoires from all over the world, so that's her thing. Soon, Granat tells her to drop the formalities since he knows she thinks of him as a kid compared to her long life. However, Frieren decides to keep it formal because she remembers how Hyder and Himmel were almost executed just for being casual with the Graf. At this point, Stark is already fidgety, and it only gets worse when the tree cutter comes in with an axe. Thinking the guy is the executioner, Stark faints right on his knees and gets floated out of Granat's room after the meeting. Next up, Frieren and Fern grab everyone's attention as they walk through the town square with Stark passed out in midair. At first, people thought it was strange, but then they realized the heroes passing by deserved respect and honored them accordingly. For the next 6 months, Frieren and her crew chill out in town, getting to know more folks every day. At one point during their stay, Frieren and her companions witnessed the final burial of the soldiers who fell in Aura's army, including Graf Granat's son. Once their 6-month stay wraps up, Frieren and her companions stock up on supplies and get ready to hit the road for heaven. That day, Graf walks them to the gates, warning them about the harsh conditions of the northern plateau, where travel is restricted and only first-class mages can pass through certain areas. Confused about the whole first-class mage thing, Frieren asks Fern for info. Fern pulls out her certification that shows she's a third-class mage and shows it to her master. Frieren rolls her eyes at the nonsense and asks Graf if there's a city up north where they can get the certification for her. Graf tells her they can get it in Oberst, the largest city further up north. After giving directions to the big city, Graf thanks Frieren and her group one last time before letting them continue their journey. Less than a day later, it starts snowing and Frieren gets hit with some serious PTSD. When Fern asks her about the northern winters, Frieren lets her know there's nothing good about them. Turns out, she was spot on because the blizzards just kept getting worse every day. Before they even reached the Schwer Mountains, they were already lost and freezing their butts off. Stark is the first to pass out from the cold, and Fern tries to wake him up, but no luck, he's too far gone. Unable to carry him with magic, Fern decides to drag his lazy self to the nearest shelter up the road. As expected, Stark's being a total pain, making Fern feel gross while she smells way better than he has in years. After an hour of trudging through the snow, they finally reach the shed Frieren mentioned. Fern senses someone inside and suggests they head back, but Frieren ignores the sobbing kid and opens the door anyway, only to find a ripped elf dude doing squats to warm himself up. Fern, never having seen a guy with a six-pack, initially thinks he's a creep, so she yanks Frieren away and suggests they find somewhere else. But then, the guy opens the door and gives Fern a dirty look for calling him a perv. When he sees Frieren as an elf, he invites them in and has them start a fire in his fireplace. Once they all warm up and get past the small talk, the buff elf guy introduces himself as Kraft the Monk. After they exchange names, they chat about where they're headed. When Kraft finds out they're going to heaven, he praises them for being righteous. Frieren tries to downplay it, but then Stark's body gets colder. While they're worried about him, it turns out he's just deep in his feels thinking about his favorite dessert. When he finally wakes up, he finds himself in Kraft's arms and flips out, waking the others. Turns out, Kraft just covered him up to share some body heat. Once he's back to reality, Stark checks out the monk's hot bod and asks him about his workout routine. After learning Kraft's name, Stark asks him to train him, but before they get into that, Kraft has the girls follow him outside to dig up some supplies from his food cart, which got buried in the snow. On the way back to the shed, Kraft asks Frieren if she knows anything about him, but when she says no, he tells her he doesn't know anything about her either. Fern tries to brag that she was the one who defeated the Demon King with the hero squad, but Kraft is clueless about demons. Once they get back to the shed, they settle in there for the next 6 months until winter wraps up. During that time, Stark trains with Kraft as much as he can to gear up for their next adventures. When it's finally time for them to split, Kraft gives Frieren this cool carved necklace and starts talking about this goddess that everyone seems to be into. Frieren straightforwardly tells him she's not into that whole pious thing at all, but Kraft wishes for everyone's sake that the goddess is real. He feels like, If she's not, then his life's got no purpose. So, he asks Frieren to share her life story with him so he can sing her praises, since she doesn't believe in any goddess. That makes Frieren flashback to a memory she had with Hyder the priest, like 80 years ago, when the tipsy priest brought up the same topic. Back then, Hyder was the only one in her friend group who realized she was holding back her mana the whole time. He thought she was pretty fascinating and wanted to know more. Frieren downplays herself, saying she's just lived life like a walking zombie. Hyder has a laugh and tells her to tell her life story, saying he might have a kid who's a mage soon. Remembering that, Frieren realizes she doesn't need to retell her story since she's already done it before. Kraft asks about the weirdo who asked her the same thing, and she tells the monk that guy's up in heaven now. Soon enough, they all wrap things up, and Kraft heads off with a smile. Fern and Stark try their best to say goodbye, knowing they'll never see the kind monk again in their short lives. Weeks later, Frieren and her crew are trudging through deep snow on their way to the next town a few miles ahead. Halfway into their trek, Frieren dozes off and almost conks her head on the ground, but Fern swoops in and catches her just in time. The next minute, both Fern and Stark are stressing over what to do with Frieren now that she's out cold. Stark first offers to carry her, but after seeing his face, Fern decides he doesn't have the best intentions for Frieren, so she just slings the poor elf on her back and keeps moving. While she sleeps, Frieren goes off to Dreamland. This time, she dreams about that tightwad king who lowballed them for the massive monster-slaying job her old hero squad did ages ago. On their way to the next stop, Himmel shows off his hero sword, and Frieren asks if it's the real deal. When Hyder says no, Himmel explains it was given to him by a blacksmith he saved when he was younger. Frieren then asks if that's what made him become a hero, and Himmel tells her it wasn't. Turns out, the real reason he became a hero was to win a bet he made against Hyder back in their orphanage days. Now that he's a real hero, the kid who challenged him back then is now a drunk priest, which is just a hilarious twist. That cracks everyone up and lifts the mood. Meanwhile, Frieren just stands there watching her friends walk into the sunset as she snaps back to reality. Frieren wakes up, still thinking about that dream, but soon gets swept up by the brutal weather they're in. She tells Fern and Stark to keep pushing on until they reach the village and stays on Fern's back because she smells so nice. Stark then asks Fern if he can carry their master, but Fern is still not trusting him one bit. Eventually, they get moving again and stop at the outskirts of the next town up north. There, Frieren hops off Fern's back and is welcomed by the young village chief, who greets her to the village of the sword. Frieren compliments the chief on how young and impressive she looks, and asks about the destruction around the edge of the village. The chief explains that it's the work of the Lord of the Mountain. At that moment, Stark starts rambling. Fern asks if he's heard of this mountain before, and Stark replies he has. According to the legends, this village supposedly holds the hero's sword, which is said to be stored in a sanctuary nearby. Legend has it that whoever pulls the sword from the stone is named a true hero. Over the years, tons of mages and heroes have tried to pull it out, but none succeeded until 80 years ago when Himmel actually pulled it out. A bit later, the village chief shows up at their cabin and makes them feel right at home. As they warm up by the fire, the chief scolds Frieren for showing up later than planned and not fulfilling her duty. Fern looks confused and asks Frieren what duty she's talking about. At that point, Frieren explains she's referring to monster extermination, and she'll kick off the extermination the next day. The next day, Stark, Fern, and Frieren head into the mountains to take down some monster wolves before checking out a sketchy cave. Stark finds a bunch of wolves and takes them out, but he knows something bad is coming. Frieren tries to warn him to bounce, but it's too late. The Lord of the Mountains, a massive demon wolf, shows up. Frieren faces off against the beast and has Stark hack off one of its arms while Fern uses magic to protect her. Once she's got her squad doing the tough stuff, she obliterates the demon wolf with Zoltrak. Afterward, Stark is left scratching his head, wondering why the hero sword is still stuck in stone when the stories say Himmel took it. Frieren tries to spout some nonsense about the demons wanting to destroy the sword, but when Stark tells her to get real, she admits Himmel actually messed up and couldn't pull it out. Turns out, Himmel didn't dwell on his failure. Instead, he let it push him to prove the legends wrong and show everyone that anyone can be a hero if they really try. Fast forward 80 years, and Himmel proves he's a way better hero than anyone else. Fern asks her master why they came up with the cover-up story. That's when Frieren spills the real reason she likes working behind the scenes. She can't stand how future generations glamorize heroes and make everyone feel inferior when they falter. After chit-chatting a bit more, Frieren and the other two ladies dip out, leaving Stark alone in the snow, reflecting on life. With their mission in the village complete, Frieren and her pals set off for the Apedit region up north. They roll into town around New Year's and settle into the finest inn. Shortly after, Frieren spends her time poring over grimoires, while Fern gets ready to hit the shops. She invites her master to come along, but Frieren decides to stay in. Before Fern heads out, Frieren reminds her it's Stark's birthday and she should grab him a gift. When Fern asks what Frieren plans to get Stark, she pulls out a potion that makes clothes disappear and tells Fern guys dig that stuff. Fern snatches the potion, dumps it on herself, and ends up completely naked before heading out. Frieren covers herself up and thinks about what to give Stark. Just then, she trips over something and decides to use it. Fern is on a mission to find Stark and finally spots him out on the edge of town, busy counting how many boob shapes he can see in the clouds. She tries to chat with him, but after hearing all the weird stuff he's saying, she decides to back off for a bit. After some time, she gathers the guts to approach him again and interrupts his boob jokes. Stark goes quiet and decides to tag along with Fern as she walks around town. He starts asking a few questions, trying to figure out if he's been a bad guy or not. Fern keeps it simple, only chiming in to see if there's something he wants. Stark looks puzzled and asks her to clarify what she means. That's when Fern reminds him that it's actually his birthday and mentions wanting to give him a birthday present. Stark gets even more confused, wondering if that's really what people do on birthdays since he's never gotten a gift from his ghostly family or his master before. Fern's a bit worried at first, thinking he might be messing around, but he's dead serious. Stark then opens up about his rough past, talking about how he grew up in a warrior village, always living in his brother Stoltz's shadow. Stoltz was a kind and strong warrior, while their dad didn't give Stark the time of day since he was the weaker one. Even so, Stoltz never held it against him, often training with the little confused redhead. Everything was going fine until demons showed up and wrecked their village. Stark was the only one who got away unhurt because his brother gave his life to save him. After hearing his story, Fern feels a mix of sympathy and pride for her goofy friend. To show her appreciation, she takes him to a gift shop and gets him something simple to keep forever. That night, when they get back home, they find Frieren making some big hamburger steaks for all three of them. Stark remembers how his master used to do the same for him. Frieren then explains that Aizen only did it because it was their village tradition to celebrate birthdays like that. After a quick trip down memory lane, Stark finally understands how much love he had received from both his brother and his master. As the last memory of his brother plays in his mind, Stark gets hit with a wave of emotion while taking his first bite of the hamburger steak. Eventually, the girls join in, and they all have a great time together that night. A few weeks later, Frieren and her crew roll into their next town and bump into this weird dude in the Altwoods. He's a total fanboy of adventurers like Frieren and her pals, but doesn't have the guts to get off his butt and actually do any adventuring. Before anything else, he starts sharing his sob story from back in the day about almost joining his buddy on a wild journey around the world to become an adventurer. After listening to him ramble, Frieren flat out asks why he's telling her this nonsense. The guy responds that he's stuck in a never-ending swamp while collecting firewood. He begs Frieren to help him out of the mud that's almost swallowing him whole, but Frieren isn't keen on getting her hands dirty. Luckily, just when things seem grim, Fern swoops in and saves him from drowning. Not long after that, they help the dirty dude back to his village, and he invites them to his harvest festival to thank them for the rescue. Frieren declines because they need to reach a big town to restock, so they'll catch him later. As they start to leave, Stark gets bitten by a poisonous snake. He quickly figures out he's bleeding from the nose and asks the girls for help. Frieren and Fern sit him down and try out a bunch of healing spells before deciding to take him to the nearby village church for better treatment. They argue a bit about it, but eventually drag the bloodied Stark to the church. Once they arrive, the priest checks him out and says it's already too late to treat him. Stark panics, but the priest tells them to hold on for his brother who might be able to work his healing magic on him. Just then, that swamp guy from earlier pops up again to talk about random junk. After babbling for a moment, he spots Stark, recognizes him, and heals him like it's a piece of cake. Not long after that, he bounces out of the church towards the plaza. Once he's gone, Frieren chats with the priest about how brilliant his brother is, pointing out how effortlessly he healed an incurable illness. The priest tells her about Hyder visiting their province and how the only thing he's proud of is his priestly badge of honor, but when it comes to real skills, Scene, his brother, and the swamp guy easily outshine him. Ever since they lost their parents when they were kids, this priest has always worried about his younger brother's well-being. Over time, he's discovered that Sign dreams of being an adventurer instead of just living the boring life of a village priest like he is. Now that they're older, the priest feels bad for his brother, who's gotten used to the humdrum life. His first request to Frieren and her crew is to help him get Sign out of the village so he can actually live his life again. Frieren and her crew got home that night, bickering about adding another member to the team. Fern and Stark were all for bringing a priest along, but Frieren was firmly against it. For her, it's always too crowded with 3 people. Stark soon tuned her out and headed to the pub downstairs to check on Sign. When he gets there, he finds Sign drinking, smoking, and gambling with a bunch of shady characters. At first, Stark is disgusted, but after a few questions, Sign finally invites him to the gambling table. About an hour later, Fern hears Stark yelling his head off. She wakes up Frieren and rushes to find out what's going on. They walk in on Stark and Sign nearly in their underwear, just wearing briefs. That's when Frieren realizes Sign can't handle losing. So, she gives him a piece of her mind, shares a couple of memories, and tells him to join their adventuring party so he can spend the rest of his sad life doing what he likes. Even after all that, Sign still says no. At that point, Frieren is already annoyed by his cocky attitude, so she makes it clear she's planning to get him on their team, whether he likes it or not. Just then, Fern strolls in with all of Stark and Sign's stuff after snagging it back from the winner for free. She hands them their dirty clothes and acts like a spoiled brat dealing with little kids. Once they wrap up the gambling mess, Fern and the crew talk about their new plans. Fern is pretty supportive of Sign's drinking habits, but Frieren is more focused than ever on getting him to join them. Over the next few days, Frieren keeps trying to convince Sign to come on board, but after several days of helping, promising, and chatting, he still refuses. After a few more failed attempts, they decide to talk to Sign's brother to find out what Sign likes. His brother says Sign loves gambling, booze, and cigarettes. He even mentions Sign has a thing for older women. Too bad they don't have an older woman to lure him into tagging along. Just then, Sign pops out from the back, asking his brother some questions, but when he sees Frieren and the others again, he freezes and bolts. Stark chases after him and asks if he'd want to travel with an older woman. Sign says he's always down for something wild since that's part of why he wanted to be an adventurer. When he asks asks Stark to show him this older woman, Frieren calls him out and reveals she's the one Stark meant. At that point, Sign is just super let down by what he sees. Frieren tries to win him back with a blown kiss, but honestly, a kiss from someone as tiny as her feels more like a creep move to him. The atmosphere goes dead after that awkward moment, and Frieren wonders where it all went wrong. Sign eventually tells them to drop it and give up on trying to recruit him. He then tells his brother there's a good chance his friend is already dead. Frieren goes off on another tangent trying to convince him. When she asks why he won't join them, Sign mentions a meeting he witnessed between his brother and Hyder when Hyder was alive. Hyder wanted to recruit his brother to head to the capital, but the guy chose to stick around and look after Sign. Even though Hyder admired his loyalty, he was still bummed he couldn't get him to go to the capital. After hearing all of that, Sign's brother gets closer and slaps him hard. He says he's never felt bad about staying behind and would rather die than watch his brother lead a dumb life. Later that evening, Sign apologizes to Frieren on his brother's behalf and chats things out with her, laying down his own terms before leaving town. As they take their first steps out of town, Sign asks them where they're headed, and Frieren says to heaven. He thinks for a moment and soon realizes the hard way what a disrespectful brat Fern is. After traveling for a few more days, they finally reached the Rod region up north. As they wandered through the town, Frieren remembered the last time she was there with Himmel and the gang 80 years ago. Not much had changed, still had those nice shops and solid infrastructure. When they got to the inn, Stark and Fern got into a big blow-up. Stark stormed out, needing to cool off after letting her have it. Sign caught the whole thing but couldn't step in. He stayed back and asked Frieren to fill him in. Turns out it was Fern's birthday, and Stark didn't get her a present, so she threw a fit and acted really spoiled. Frieren didn't side with her this time, and Sign tried explaining that guys don't usually care about birthdays and anniversaries the way girls do. This only made Fern angrier, and she kicked him until he got fed up with her drama. Finally, he left the room, telling her to go find Stark and apologize. Frieren agreed, so Fern set off on a mission to track him down. Eventually, she found Stark sulking by the fountain in the plaza, deep in thought about his choices. She didn't know how to approach him, so she left and spotted Sign looking at some gifts to give her. After chatting about the gifts, Sign asked if she'd found Stark yet. Fern confirmed and admitted she had no idea how to talk to him. Sign figured out that she just wasn't used to talking to boys her age. As he picked out a gift for her, he advised her not to take it out on Stark, since he probably didn't even remember it was her birthday. Even though she knew he had a point, Fern shot back that she had gotten Stark a present on his birthday, so he should have done the same for her. Sign asked if she picked it out for him or went with him to buy it. When she said it was the latter, Sign kept dropping truth bombs until she finally changed her mind and decided to go talk to the slowpoke. After giving her the birthday gift, he headed back to the inn after Fern apologized for kicking him. An hour later, Fern found Stark in the plaza, checking out a statue of Himmel the hero. She called out to him, and Stark apologized for not getting her a gift sooner. Honestly, Lil Bro didn't know what she liked and was too scared to ask her to pick something out with him, thinking she'd just get annoyed again. Fern told him not to think like that. She then apologized for being harsh, and the two lovebirds kissed and made up. Once they were over their spat, Stark took his new babe to the gift shop to pick out a nice gift for her. Meanwhile, Sign spotted Frieren watching Stark and Fern from the roof of a random building, and teased her for being sneaky. He then talked about the young privilege of arguing and bonding, asking Frieren how she got over her teenage angst. When Frieren asked for some context, Sign realized he was the only grown-up among the four of them. Frieren quickly got on his wavelength and talked about Hyder's darker side, and how he tended to irritate her. Sign was a bit shocked to hear her talk trash about Hyder since the old man he knew was more chill and collected. Before saying anything else, Frieren recalled a memory with Hyder from when he was old and ready to kick the bucket. That night, she asked Hyder how he became so mature and responsible compared to the jerk he used to be. Hyder gave her some lofty talk about his philosophy on life, and even brought up Fern. Frieren asked a few more questions, then got up to pat his head to praise him her way. Just then, she patted Sign's head the same way, and called him a real adult. Sign thanked Frieren for the help but wished an older woman would do that for him too. Days later, the four of them hitch a ride through Bande Woods heading to the next town. After chatting with the driver, Frieren spots Fern's cute new bracelet and asks her about it. Fern gets a bit shy, revealing it was a gift from Stark. Frieren realizes the pattern looks familiar and digs through her stuff to find the ring Himmel gave her ages ago. After pulling everything out, she finally finds the ring, but before she can say anything, an avian monster snatches their carriage up into the air. Frieren apologizes for lowering her guard and shifts the convo to how they can avoid becoming monster snacks. She starts telling her flying story, but Stark cuts her off, telling her to get to the point. Eventually, Frieren decides to fly with the driver, while Fern teams up with Sign for a safer landing. As for Stark, Frieren tells him to just jump down. He flat out refuses, and Frieren wonders why. Fern suggests using magic to levitate the whole carriage, which Frieren thinks over. Meanwhile, the avian monster dives down to slam the carriage into the ground to munch on the leftovers. Before it can dig in, Frieren jumps out and takes the demon down with a Zoltrak spell. After handling the monster, their carriage falls into the deep woods. Luckily, Frieren slows the fall just enough so even though they lost some merchandise, they're still alive. By nightfall, Sign tends to the horse and joins the others in their grumpiness, especially since since they're stuck. Thankfully, they still have some hope as they spend the next few days gathering wood from the forest to fix the carriage, while lazy Frieren kicks back and organizes her stuff. At one point, Sign discovers the bracelet Stark got Fern for her birthday and praises Stark for spending 3 miserable hours searching for the perfect gift. Stark ends up really happy that she loves it. Then, Sign explains the significance of the pattern on the bracelet, an inverted lotus, and tells Stark that people only give those to their partners. Stark gets really nervous and tries to apologize to Fern, who can hear everything, for rushing things. Fern keeps her usual sternness and scolds Stark when he offers to return the gift and get her a different bracelet. After that, they all head back to the crash site and keep working on the carriage however they can. Hours turn into days as everyone pitches in to keep things going. A few nights later, they finally wrap up repairs on the carriage. Fern finds Frieren searching the woods and learns she's on the hunt for the ring Himmel gave her 80 years ago. She decides to help, but Frieren tells her not to worry because she's already used to losing things by now. Fern tries to explain the meaning behind the ring and bracelet patterns, but Frieren says it doesn't matter. She's ready to let the ring go since she's already accustomed to losing things. Fern takes her back to camp to ask for help. Their driver, hearing this, gives Frieren a scroll with a spell from his village that might help her find the ring. Frieren thanks him, grabs the scroll, and flies up into the air. After recalling the moment Himmel bought the ring for her, Frieren finally gives the spell a shot. A few seconds later, the ring pings its location and shows up not too far away. Before she goes for it, Frieren thinks back to when she received the ring and retrieves it. The next day, Frieren holds the ring close, smiling because now she understands why Himmel gave it to her. After traveling for a few more weeks, Frieren and her crew finally roll into the Lob Hills up north. For a little while, they cruise towards the next town, the carriage driver handling the reins. After a bit of quiet, Sign pipes up and asks Fern and Stark how long they've been tagging along with Frieren. Once they share their answers, they keep moving until Sign starts chatting again, this time griping about how the squad is missing something crucial. While Fern thinks they need a thief to keep Frieren safe from treasure chest traps, Sign goes straight to the point and says what they really need is an older woman with a hotter body. Stark counters, saying Frieren's old enough, but then Sign challenges him to name one enticing feature of hers. Not wanting to stir the pot, Stark abruptly changes the topic and points out the village ahead. Sadly, when they get there, they find everyone in town is out cold. Sign quickly rushes to check their pulses and is relieved to find they're still alive. Frieren suggests they leave the village as is, which ticks off Fern. They end up doing some digging around and realize the villagers are under a curse. Frieren breaks it down for Stark, who gets super freaked out, fearing it might already be too late to help anyone. Luckily, they've got a priest like Sign with them, so he dives into figuring out the curse while Frieren keeps rambling on. When she finally asks for proof, Sign asks for more time to wrap up his investigation. Meanwhile, Frieren and the others poke around the houses, and she explains the whole priesthood gig and the perks of being a priest, mainly how they're tough against curses. She also mentions that even she, an elven mage, can't identify or defend against curses much, but it's clear that the village is still under the curse's grip. Stark and Fern get anxious, worried they might end up like the villagers soon. Just then, Sign figures out the curse is traced back to a monster in the woods, urging them to hurry before they all knocked out. But just as they're about to head out, Stark keels over, hit by the curse. Frieren asks the priest to wake him up, but he says it's not possible. So, they set off on their long trek, hauling Stark in the air until they camp out for the night. Not long after, Fern crashes too. When Sign and Frieren see this, they put up a barrier around Fern and Stark before heading into the dark to track down the monster. As they close in, Frieren warns Sign to never take on the monster solo, but just as he's about to respond, she falls asleep too. After multiple tries to wake her, Sign gives up and sets her down nearby. Moments later, the monster, which Sane names a chaos flower, pops up looking like a man-eating plant and goes after him. Sane does his best to dodge its attacks. When he spots an opening at its core, he launches a magic spell, but the chaos flower deflects it. With this new twist, Sign thinks of a million ways to take the beast down. He considers waking Frieren, but realizes he wouldn't have enough time to explain what's going on before she zonks out again. Just when he's about to throw in the towel, he recalls a lesson from Hyder about Frieren back in the day. If Frieren is the fighter Hyder described, then maybe his plan could actually work. After dodging the chaos flower's last attack, Sign manages to wake her up and tries to explain, but without missing a beat, Frieren unleashes a flexible Zoltrak attack pattern, smashing the core and taking out the monster altogether. The next morning, Fern, Stark, Frieren, and Sign head back to the village, where everyone's super grateful for them taking down that useless monster that was messing up their lives. After getting some thanks from the hot village elder, Frieren and her crew finally hit the road to the next town. As they travel, Frieren gives Sign a little thank you pat on the head. Soon, they roll into Vorig, the fortress city, which is also the pit stop to Oberst. There, Frieren finds out they're pretty much broke. Just before they reach the city gates, a nobleman spots them and rolls over in his carriage. When he hops out with his butler, he checks out Stark and invites him to his mansion for a job. Before anyone can even blink, Stark's already inside the rich guy's crib, and the nobleman kicks things off by asking Stark for his name. But Frieren jumps in, telling the dude to back off her frontliner. The nobleman takes offense and throws some shade at Stark, asking if he needs his mommy to keep answering for him. At this point, Frieren stands up and tells her crew to bounce. But when she remembers they're flat broke, she takes a deep breath and listens to the nobleman's pitch. Once they get to know each other, the man takes Stark around his mansion, asking about his village in the Klee region of the Central Lands. Stark stays tight-lipped, and the nobleman keeps walking until they reach this huge mural of his son on the wall. Fern and Frieren can totally see the family resemblance between Stark and the nobleman's son, Wirt, and they ask why that matters for the job. The guy, who's revealed to be Lord Orden, explains that he needs Stark to pretend to be his son, who died in battle about a month ago. Since nobody knows Wirt's dead yet, the plan is for Stark to impersonate him for a few months, to keep everyone's spirits up in the fortress city while they rebuild their forces. Near the end of this 3-month gig, Stark will have to attend a fancy party and act like Wirt to trick some important people. Once the party wraps up, Stark can hit the road. After hearing all this, Frieren asks about the pay, and Lord Orden mentions it's a pretty sweet deal. She then asks him to throw in a grimoire too, and he agrees. Then Stark asks what he should do about the scar on his head, and Orden tells him to wear it proud because everyone will think he got it in that recent battle. Stark grumbles about how tough life's about to get, and Fern tells him to toughen up and help the crew make some cash. With that sorted, Orden has Gabble teach Stark some proper etiquette for the next few months, while Frieren and the others live it up like royalty. One day, Stark runs into Fern and tries out a new proposal pose he just learned. Fern's heart skips a beat, but she keeps it cool and doesn't let him know his little act got to her. Eventually, Stark catches up with the guy claiming to be his dad in the hallway and asks why he's being so disrespectful to his son. Orden scoffs and says he's just honoring his son's dying wish. After hanging out in the hallway for a bit, the man takes Stark to the yard where they find his second son, Mutt, training. Stark senses a sibling comparison going on but stays quiet and keeps training. Just before he gets started, he asks the nobleman what he thinks of Mutt. Orden says that while the kid might not be as talented as his big brother, he works hard, and that's what counts for the most part. Stark tells him to make sure Mutt hears that often, and Orden responds that he already does, so much that it's getting to the kid's head. Stark chuckles and continues his training. In the next scene, Orden calls Fern and tells her to get ready for her etiquette training so she can hit the soiree with Stark. Fern can't say no, so she dives into the training, which goes on for about a month until the big night finally arrives. At the party, Fern vents about all the stress she had to deal with, and Stark reminds her not to underestimate him again. After they both apologize, Stark takes her hands and leads her to the dance floor to show off his moves. They dance beautifully and catch a lot of people's attention. Meanwhile, Frieren keeps munching on cake and enjoying her evening. Once the soiree wraps up, Stark meets with Orden one last time before collecting his payment. Orden thanks him for a job well done, and jokingly suggests adopting Stark to take his son's place. Stark gently turns him down. They chat a bit about Stark's hometown, and Orden reminisces about the day he found Stark in the woods, mentioning how he treated his son the last time they met. Stark shares a couple of times he disrespected his master, and they bond over their lost family members. A few days later, Frieren struggles to choose a new grimoire to take with her. While she's sorting things out, Stark and Sign finally catch up about their experiences, and everyone's buzzing with happiness for the nobleman and his new heir. Before we dive back into the main story, there's a flashback that takes us to Sign's younger days as a priest. One day, his adventurous buddy, who was also younger then, found him fishing and dragged him back to the village just so they could get a photo taken by the mage, who often dropped by. Fast forward over 10 years to the present, and we see Sign sitting by the campfire, staring at that very same picture from long ago. This time, though, it's in a pendant. After a stroll down memory lane, Sign stares off into space, worrying about where his buddy is now. The next day, they all hit the road and walk until they reach the Klar region in the northern lands. On the way, Frieren chats about one of her old friends, a guy named Old Man Vol. She mentions she wants to catch up with him before he passes away. Stark finds that a bit rude, but Fern feels good knowing Frieren has someone to connect with. Turns out, dwarves can live about 300 to 400 years, so there's a pretty good chance the old man is still kicking. Frieren walks with pride and excitement, hoping to meet him soon. After a bit more traveling, they arrive at Old Man Vol's village. There, they spot the man sitting at the entrance. Frieren tries her best to jog his memory so he remembers her. Sadly, the old guy is pretty out of it and doesn't seem to recognize her. Stark doesn't think much of him and calls him senile. To teach Stark a lesson, the old man smacks him on the shin, dropping Stark to the ground in pain. Then he goes on about how careless warriors are while officially welcoming Frieren to the village. After some small talk, Frieren takes Fern with her into the village, leaving Stark to train with the old man during their stay. Soon enough, Frieren asks for some work since she wants to be around for about a decade. Fern warns her not to waste time because they only have a week. Frieren agrees and continues chatting with the old man while Sign and Fern pitch in on the farm. After a solid day's work, the farmer thanks them for their help and shares some history about Old Man Vol. According to him, Vol has always been the village's protective spirit, and even he can't explain why he cares so much about the place. The farmer feels happy for Vol now that he has a friend to talk to. Over the next few days, life moves moves on with Stark struggling through his training and Frieren enjoying her time with the old man. One night, while walking through a field of glowing plants, Frieren checks in on Stark's progress, and the old man assures her that he's doing just fine. She thanks him for helping her get to know Himmel and the others. In another flashback, we see Himmel and the other three thanking the old man for his help with a task. As they chat, he reminisces about his deceased wife and how much she loved the village he's been part of for so long. He thinks that honoring his last promise to her is probably what keeps him from leaving. He tries to downplay his memory, claiming he's too old to even recall her face, but Himmel and the others praise him for sticking to his promise to a loved one. The old man calls Himmel a great hero and blesses him before vowing to carry his memory far into the future. Himmel chuckles and points out they've got Frieren, who's likely going to be around for a few thousand more years, to handle that. Old man Vol smiles and commends Himmel for having such great friends. After reminiscing about a warm memory, Old man Vol asks Frieren if she still remembers Himmel's face. Frieren feels a bit offended and tells him she remembers Himmel, as well as Hyder and Eisen, since they inspired her to connect with people. The old man gives her another compliment, mentioning that even though he can't recall his wife's face anymore, he still feels the responsibility to protect the village. Frieren chuckles, calling him a jokester. As time goes by, Old man Vol asks Frieren where she's headed, and she tells him they're all going to Oriol, the land where souls rest around Ende, where the demon castle is. Not knowing the demon king has already been defeated, the old man blesses Frieren. She tries to reveal the truth but changes her mind, promising to carry his memory into the future. To wrap up their meaningful final meeting, the old man thanks her for visiting him during his last moments. The next day, Frieren and the others pack up and leave the village. As they're heading out, the old man calls out to her, saying he dreamt about his wife the night before. Frieren smiles and continues on her path. After traveling for a few more days, they reach a settlement on Roar Road, still in the 29th year since Himmel's death. They stop to wait for Sign as he wraps up his questions to the locals. Once he's finished, they move further north. Stark asks Sign what he was inquiring about earlier, and Sign questions Stark if he remembers why he joined this trip. When Stark admits he doesn't, Sign shows everyone a picture in his pendant, reminding them of the reason he's with them. He was asking the locals if they'd seen someone matching his friend's description. Now that he learned they haven't, he encourages his friends to keep moving north until they find the loser. Stark asks for the loser's name, and Sign replies it's Guerrilla Warrior, a name that's hard to forget. To make things even more interesting, Sign shares his nickname, Goatee Priest, which makes the others think he's a bit odd. As they keep going, they reach the canyon connecting the old village to Oberst. If they keep walking for a week, they'll hit the big city in no time. But Sign asks for a quick detour to check out a village nearby to inquire about his buddy. Since the others are also keen to take a break, they agree to his plan. Soon enough, they arrive at the village where Sign asks the first person he sees about Guerrilla Warrior. To his surprise, the guy knows the funny character and sends him to a stubborn old woman living on a plateau just a short walk away. Sign and his friends follow the guy until they find the old woman. They ask her about Guerrilla Warrior, but she insists they complete several tasks before she spills the beans. For the first task, she hands Frieren and the others a letter to deliver to Nagel, a blacksmith in the next town. With no other option, the four of them take the letter and move on to the next town. Along the way, Frieren shares some stories about how Himmel handled things in his day. Before long, they arrive in town and deliver the letter. When they get back to the village, they keep working on a bunch of strange tasks for the old woman, which sometimes means taking down monsters. For their final chore, the old lady hands Sign a bucket of polish and tells everyone to follow her into the woods to find the statues she wants them to shine up. The four of them tag along with the grouchy old woman and chat about the heroes whose statues have been forgotten out there. Once they reach the spot, Frieren has a tough time remembering who the statue represents. After looking closely, Stark figures out that the dude on the far right is Kraft, the elf they rescued during that brutal winter. But they can't figure out who the guy on the left is. Seeing those statues jogs Sign's memory back to when Hyder first brought him and his buddy, Guerrilla Warrior, who was his pal back in the day. Hyder had just warned them how easy it is for past heroes to be forgotten, so to make sure people remembered him, his friend decided to go by Guerrilla Warrior while Hyder nicknamed Sign Goatee Priest. When he snaps back to reality, the stubborn old woman finally chimes in, saying how much his buddy talked about him and their dreams of being heroes together. By the end of the day, Sign leaves the village feeling a bit down because he just learned that his friend is in Tour, a trading city that's the opposite of the huge city they were heading to. Sign feels a little lost about what to do next, since he doesn't want to bail on his new crew just yet. Unable to figure things out, Sane kicks back and thinks carefully about what to say next. Time slips away, and as the sun dips down, Stark heads back to the village and grabs a cabin so they can crash there and wait to continue their trek with or without Sign the next morning. That night, Sign and Fern go out to gather firewood and supplies, respectively, but when they return, Fern's hands are ice cold. Frieren and Stark check them out, surprised by just how freezing they are. Fern playfully places her chilly hands on Stark's cheeks, catching him off guard. After they get past that awkward moment, Frieren and Fern realize that winter has officially shown up. Instead of panicking about the cold, Frieren stays chill and reassures Fern that they can still travel on the snow as long as there aren't any blizzards. The next morning, a brutal blizzard slams into the area, and the village chief warns them against facing the harsh winds, saying they could get stuck in the snowstorm for a month. To keep everyone warm and safe, he lets them stay in the cabin for an entire month to recover. Frieren is super happy happy, especially after finding out that there's a magic shop run by a quirky old guy in the village. This means she can check out some legendary spells and work toward her goals. Moving on, she decides to share a few spells she's picked up from shops over time and insists they all head back inside to chill for the rest of the month. Over the next few weeks, life goes on as usual, with Fern and Stark getting closer every day and Sign mostly hanging out in the taverns, drinking his heart out. Almost a month later, Sign is seen relaxing in the tavern when Frieren pops in and asks him to return to the cabin because Stark and Fern are having a silly fight. Sane rolls his eyes at the drama and heads back to the cabin, where he finds Stark crying like a baby. To speed things up, Sign pulls Stark into a private room for a chat. There, Stark admits Fern is mad at him just because he touched her cheeks with his bare hands. Sign scoffs and gives Stark a quick rundown on how to handle women. After giving him a minute-long pep talk on how to treat ladies right, he encourages Stark to go back and apologize to Fern. Stark promises to make it right before leaving, allowing Fern to step in for some questioning. Sign tells her she crossed the line by yelling at Stark. Fern admits she messed up, but explains it was only because Stark was a bit rough with her. He grabbed her shoulder with those big warrior hands, and it freaked her out a little. Sign asks if she likes Stark, and she says yes. So, he tells her to go back out there and own up to being a jerk. Before long, Fern and Stark apologize and clear the air between them. In the next scene, Sign is seen tossing back drinks and getting annoyed while Frieren sits across from him. She totally ignores his fussing and thanks him for sorting out the drama with those two dorks. Sign laughs and asks Frieren why she tried to force him to travel with them. Frieren smiles and says it's because she wanted to give him a reason to live, just like Himmel did for her when they first met. With that, she asks Sign if he regrets deciding to join them, and he says not at all. After his umpteenth drink, Sign steps outside for a smoke and to gather his thoughts. As he stands there, he reflects on all the memories he's made with Frieren's crew compared to the fun times he had with his buddy in the past. This helps him figure out what he wants to do next, and the following morning, Sign wakes up early and gets ready to hit the road. Frieren and her crew decided to move on too, not wanting to get left behind. When the time came to split up, Sign made the call to head off in search of his buddy in Tur. He said his goodbyes to his new friends, promising he'd reunite with them at least once before he kicked the bucket. As the hopeful young priest disappeared into the distance, he thought about all the good times he had with Frieren's gang, and soon found himself getting bored being on his own. A few days after parting ways, Frieren and her friends rolled into the Offen mountain range in the northern lands and set up camp in a little cave. One morning, Stark woke up early and headed out to grab some breakfast ingredients. When he returned, he found the girls still snoozing and whipped up breakfast before trying to wake them up. After calling out their names a couple of times, Stark felt that something was off. He checked on Fern and realized she was running a fever. As for Frieren, that laid-back elf was just lost in dreamland. Thankfully, Stark roused her to let her know about Fern's fever. When Frieren got the news about her favorite mage, she dug through her bag until she found the pamphlet. Sign left them before they split and checked it for herbs to help treat Fern. Stark asked a few random questions about the Holy Scripture, which was the only book they used to check for illnesses. Frieren pulled it out from under their breakfast pot and used its magic to figure out that Fern just had a fever. To get some herbs, Frieren took Stark to a nearby settlement with Stark carrying Fern the whole way. When they arrived, they spotted a woman milking cows and asked if there was a place for their friend to rest and recover. The woman kindly offered them her bed. After settling in, Frieren inquired about the cherry blossom icicle tree, and the woman pointed them north. Frieren thanked her and held onto Fern's hands after the woman left. Stark, confused, asked why she kept holding Fern's hands, and Frieren explained it helped calm her down and heal faster. Fern, who had been awake, blushed and scolded Frieren for treating her like a kid in front of Stark. Apologizing, Frieren left the house with Stark to go pick some cherry blossoms. On their way, Frieren griped about how fast Fern was growing up, but she quickly pushed those thoughts aside so they could grab the herbs. For the next few hours, the duo trekked far and wide until they finally spotted the beautiful cherry tree. Before they started harvesting, Stark asked Frieren again about why she held Fern's hands. She explained it was the only way she knew to ease Fern's pain. When she asked what Stark thought she should have done, he said she did the right thing, which triggered a memory for Frieren of Himmel taking care of a sick Frieren back in the day. Once she snapped back to reality, she and Stark chatted a bit longer before getting down to picking white mushrooms. When they got back to camp, Frieren cooked up a soup with the herbs and served it to Fern the next morning. While she was busy with that, Stark helped the woman with milking the cows, and Fern had her soup. Days later, Fern was back to normal and thanked her travel buddies, as well as the lady who let her stay at her cabin. Once they packed up their stuff, they hit the road again, headed for Auburst, the magical city. Weeks later, they finally catch a glimpse of the big magical city on the horizon. Even though they still have a few miles to go, Frieren and her crew can relax a bit because they're getting really close to Oriole. As they walk down the hills to hop on a carriage, the trio chats about the mage exams. Fern asks Frieren to get her first-class mage certification since she doesn't think she's strong enough to tackle such a tough task. Frieren responds responds that she doubts she'll need the certification for long, since she won't be coming back to the Holy City every 50 years just to renew it. Stark gets curious and asks the two mages why they need a powerful mage to cross the northern plateau. Frieren explains that they need someone strong to protect them because there are some strange monsters lurking on those plateaus. Once they're in the carriage, they keep talking until Frieren gets offended when Fern calls her an old mage. Eventually, she stops talking and dozes off on Fern's lap. Then she wakes up and starts giving Fern some friendly mage advice, which leaves Stark a bit surprised and confused. When she finishes, she shares how many times she's lost to creatures with less mana just to make her point. After hearing all that, the two of them just go quiet. Miles away, at the edge of Grafgranat's domain, a funky-looking mage is complaining about the long road to Oberst. Knowing she's being followed, she relaxes and waits for them to show their faces. When they finally do, they threaten to take her out unless she hands over her staff. Before she can fight back, Kraft, the elf from earlier, appears and chases them off. After saving the bandits from the deadly mage, Kraft introduces himself to Ubel, the bored mage nearby. Once they get to know each other, Kraft notices Ubel's bloodlust and decides not to engage. He mentions he knows about her previous killings and prefers not to meddle in others' business. Ubel gets tired of the old guy and continues on her journey to Oberst. When Kraft finds out she's headed there for the exam, he thinks of Frieren and wishes her luck. In the next scene, Frieren and her friends visit the Continental Magic Association in Oberst to get the scoop on the first-class mage test. The receptionist goes over the requirements for them, and Frieren bolts out of there right after hearing them, wishing Fern good luck. Fern quickly grabs her, begging her not to leave yet. Frieren pulls out her holy emblem and asks if it will help. At that moment, an old man spots the emblem and calls Frieren back to take a good look at it. Once he sees it's the real deal, he advises Frieren to take the first-class mage exam, even though she's not certified. That evening, Frieren and Fern talk about the power the holy emblems carry. At some point, Frieren shares that even 80 years ago, her buddies, Himmel and the rest, didn't recognize how important the necklace was. Still, Fern and Stark let her know she's a really good mage. The next day, the trio hits up the big library to study for the upcoming exam. There, they learn that there are about 2,000 registered mages on the continent, but only 45 of them are first class. Also, the exam coming up only happens once every 3 years, and most of the time, hardly anyone passes because the risks are high and the challenges are tough. Plus, with peace reigning, there's not much demand for mages, so a lot of people don't put in the effort to reach that prestigious rank. For now though, Frieren suggests they train as hard as they can for the next 2 months until they're ready for the exam. Over those 2 months, that's exactly what they did. On the first day of exams, the head test proctor, Mage Genau, welcomes all the examinees and gives them some quick instructions before kicking off the first task. Meanwhile, 2 other proctors are in the corner, checking out the skills of the strongest mages in the crowd. After naming some impressive candidates, including Ubel, they turn to Frieren and underestimate her mana, calling her an old mage. When it's time to get serious, Genau lays down the rules for the first test. He splits the 57 participants into teams of 3 and explains how they'll find each other. Frieren wears her bracelet and uses her mana to locate her teammates in the crowd. She strides over to find them, only to see the 2 goofballs squabbling like crazy over who gets to hold the birdcage. Shortly after, Fern ends up paired with Can, and they start getting to know each other as teammates. As the first test kicks off, the examiner takes them to a grassy field for their challenge. Each team gets a cage to catch a rare bird called Still, and they have to return with one. The next day, all team members must stick together during the test. If anyone leaves the barrier, the whole squad fails instantly. Once the instructions are clear, the test begins. For the first half, Frieren has to babysit the 2 fools bickering over the birdcage. After a quick rock-paper-scissors showdown, Leween, the smarter one, gets to handle the cage, while Can, who's just a third-class mage like her partner, trails behind Frieren, who takes charge. Frieren chats with the girls a bit before asking if they know anything about the Still. When they don't, she suggests they go find one and watch it for a while. After a few hours of searching, Can gets tired and takes a break. Leween decides to scout ahead and come back with info. Frieren checks if Leween thinks she can handle it, and Leween confidently says yes. With that settled, Frieren lets her go but warns her to watch the skies. Can praises Frieren's leadership and then asks what she meant by being cautious about the skies. Just then, Leween returns, leading them to a Still she spotted. When they arrive, Can and Leween team up to trap the bird with a magical icicle. Frieren prepares them for what's coming, and before they can process it, the bird takes off at lightning speed. Frieren explains how fast the bird really is, letting them know capturing it will take some serious observation. As they all dry their hair, Frieren starts to feel good about her teammates' skills. A minute later, they're back to bickering while watching the Still birds in the area. By night, Can wakes up to find Frieren's sleeping bag empty. She hears the faint patter of rain and wonders where the mage could be. Eventually, she hunts high and low for Frieren, until she stumbles into a monster bird's den and gets attacked. Caught off guard, Can can't react quickly enough and even loses her staff in the chaos. Just in time, Frieren shows up to help her out. After saving her, she asks Can why she relies so heavily on Leween, especially when she doesn't like her. Can admits she's always been timid and can't act in tough situations. She feels like a pampered baby who's never had to tough it out. Someone like Leween, who's faced challenges, is exactly what she needs to get it together and do what needs to be done. She shares a story about her first flying experience. Lewin had to push her off a cliff to help her learn. Kan wouldn't even know she could fly if Lewin hadn't done that. Kan says a few nice things about Lewin and shares her latest findings with Frieren, hoping they can use them for something useful. After their quick chat by the cliff, Frieren and Kan head back to get some sleep. A few hours later, Frieren watches the girls snoozing and remembers a time from 80 years ago with Himmel and the gang when Himmel tried to calm Eisen by pretending to be just as scared. That night, Heider said something that stuck with Frieren ever since. As she reminisces, she gazes at the girls before getting back to her tasks. Meanwhile, Fern and her crew have already captured their still bird, but now the real challenge kicks in, keeping their bird safe from thieves. Bright and early the next morning, Frieren and the girls wake up to recap what they learned about the birds earlier. From their observations, it's clear these birds are super fast and can sense mana. They're tough too. Ordinary magic attacks won't do much against them since they can catch the mana before it even leaves the mage's wand. To add to their woes, Stilles don't even have mana, so they can't be picked up by mana detection. These hurdles are just the beginning of the trouble they'll face if they manage to find one. Frieren then shows off a bird-catching spell she mastered some time ago, telling Kan she used it to capture the monster that almost snatched her the night before. Kan appreciates the help again, and Lewin asks Frieren why she didn't use that spell on the Stilles they spotted before. Frieren explains that the spell only works within a 50-centimeter range, and since they couldn't get that close the previous day, it would have been impossible to use it. That's when it finally hits the two girls that they're facing a major setback. Moving on, Frieren asks the girls to share a bit about their magic. Kan kicks things off by explaining the limits of her water magic. Turns out, she can only control existing water, not created out of thin air, and since the barrier keeps rain out, she can only use her magic near large bodies of water. Even then, she has to pump her mana into the water ahead of time to control it easily. If she does that though, the still will sense her mana, and likely steer clear of any water source. Hearing stay away sparks an idea for Frieren. Once she hears about Lewin's ice magic, which isn't that impressive yet, she spills her plan to the girls and takes their suggestions for a few more minutes before they get down to business. During this time, Lewin and her good friend still manage to bicker a bit before getting focused. Over with Fern and her pals, Land and Yubel, they're hiding out inside a big dead tree trunk, waiting for the test to start. Even though Yubel isn't used to this kind of plan, she follows the chill vibes from Land. A little while later, they realize they're out of water, so they decide to head over to the nearby lake to grab some. On the way, Land expresses how stoked he is to snag a bird quickly. Yubel, not paying attention, feels something off with the ground. They discover they're walking along a dry riverbed, and since the barrier keeps water out, their only reliable water source is the big lake in the middle of the testing area. Unfortunately, all the test takers also need water to survive, so there's a good chance they'll bump into some competition at the lake. Understanding the situation, Land opts to look for a small pond instead of heading straight to the lake. Before they can make much headway, they're ambushed by the 8th party, Sharf, Era, and Rybel, who are all skilled mages. Fern reacts just in time to fend off a deadly attack, leaving a solid first impression on the attackers. After some chatter, Werbel demands that Yubel hand over the still they've caught. Just as they're about to do anything, a loud bang echoes from the lake, and everyone's left confused, not sure what's happening. What they didn't know was that Lewin was behind the loud bang as she froze the whole lakeside solid with ice. Other test takers hanging out by the lake noticed, and some of them tried to melt the ice. After icing over the lake, Lewin took off to tackle her next task. Meanwhile, Denkin, a second-class mage from the Empire, was sizing up the situation with his crew. He noted to them that the adventurers from the other party were super smart for leaving a big mana imprint on the lake. This would make the birds steer clear of the area and look for spots with little to no mana. While Fern and the others were caught up in battle, Frieren and her group kept searching for other watering holes and ponds to infuse with their mana, hoping to limit the number of spots the Stillies could land on. On the flip side, Denkin watched the other parties lose it and act all crazy when they should have just chilled and waited to figure out Frieren's plan. Instead of joining those clowns, Denkin and his buddies, Richter and Laufen, took their time strolling through the forest to dig deeper into Frieren's strategy. At one point, they stumbled across a bunch of dead bodies hanging from the trees. After a quick look, Denkin figured they got taken out by some flying monsters. He hurriedly told them to keep moving, but Laufen wanted to at least take the bodies down and give them a proper burial. Denkin pointed out how ridiculous that would be, which made Laufen question why the proctors picked such a dangerous spot for their test. Richter chimed in, saying it's because they think anyone who dies in a place like that isn't cut out to be a first-class mage. As they trooped on, Denkin slammed the Continental Association of Magic for that kind of dumb logic. Richter asked him why he was so bitter about it, and he shot back that magic is useless if the caster is a selfish jerk who doesn't care about people. Richter called him weak, and Denkin warned him not to go there again. As they kept looking, they found Kan at a small watering hole, pouring her mana into it before she left. They rushed over to check it out right after she was gone. Denkin noticed that Kan had only mixed a tiny bit of mana into the water, and he couldn't get why she'd do that. He knew the Stillas could see the mana, so they'd steer clear. After a moment of thinking, he figured Frierin's group must be at a watering hole without any mana in it. Instead of wasting time hunting for that one, he decided to take a break while keeping an eye out for any magical activity. Not long after, Kan showed up at one of the mana-free watering holes and found Frieren there with Lewin. After some chit-chat, Frieren completely concealed her mana and went still to make sure none leaked out. Once they got the signal, the girls ducked out of sight, with Kan griping about the rain coming down outside the barrier. A few minutes into their little setup, monsters and creatures from everywhere appeared to grab a drink before heading off to hunt. About an hour later, the first stillbird landed on Frieren's shoulder, right where her spell could work. Eventually, she caught the bird in a cage, just as she noticed Laufin and Denkin close by. Before they could book it, Laufin used her high-speed spell to grab the birdcage before Frieren even realized what was happening. Meanwhile, Sharf and Era were squaring off against Land and Fern. In Fern's fight, she relied on basic attack and defense spells against Era, which really ticked the angry bird off. Eri called Fern's magic outdated, but still felt uneasy every time Fern blocked her magic hits. As for Ubel, she was holding her ground against Werble. Era praised Werble for his sneaky way of using magic and warned Fern that if he got serious, Ubel wouldn't make it. So, speaking of the devil, we see Ubel going after Werble instead of sticking to Era's plan. Werble manages to dodge most of Ubel's hits until he steps out of her 5-meter range, where she can't land a hit on him. At this point, Werble is just bluffing even harder, egging Ubel on to keep coming at him. She responds, giving him the green light as Ubel challenges him to try. Next up, Fern is gearing up to unleash a saturation attack spell at Ere, who's feeling pretty smug when she realizes it's just basic attacks. But Fern stays chill and keeps firing off those basic spells rapidly until she completely overwhelms Era, ending with a bang. Then, literally a second later, Werble uses his signature magic spell, Sorganale, to pin down Ubel. Once that spell hits her, Ubel can feel her joints and muscles getting locked up, making it tough to move. She rolls her eyes, annoyed at the spell, and wonders why the idiot in front of her didn't use it to snag a still. Just as she's about to get an answer, Werble interrupts, explaining that if he even blinks or looks away from Ubel, the spell will break, and she'll be free. He threatens to take her out if she pulls anything funny, but then Ubel questions why he hasn't done that since the fight started. He could have taken her out during his surprise attack, but he didn't. Before she gets to dig deeper into that, Werble tells her to hand over the birdcage. Ubel is about to comply when it hits her she isn't obligated to do whatever he says. Out of the blue, she hurls the birdcage into the air and tries to attack him when he's distracted. Unfortunately, she only manages to give him a little nick on the nose, which even disappoints Werble. After some aimless chatter, he goes in for the kill. Ubel notices him hesitating and asks about his backstory. Werble decides to let her stall a bit, so he talks about how common it is for Northerners to send women and kids into battle. Before finishing her off, he casually mentions he's been taking out women and children for ages, so she shouldn't think he's got a problem killing her. After listening to his rambling, Ubel is just waiting for him to wrap it up. When a couple of awkward minutes pass, she finally asks if he really has the guts to kill her. When he doesn't say anything, she starts to realize he's actually hesitant to add another victim to his count. Werble keeps rambling to buy her some time, but eventually, his luck runs out, and he braces himself for the final blow. Just as he's about to do it, Fern shows up, threatening to take him out if he messes with her teammates. Werble is caught off guard that the one they thought was the weakest actually brought Era down. He wonders if Fern's the one who grabbed the birdcage, and Ubel explains how it all went down. It was just dumb luck, and poor Werble's out of it, especially now that Fern claims she took Era down. He thinks about his chances and decides to give up and move toward his teammate's body. Ubel tries to call him back, but he's like, chill out, just focus on what we gotta do. Eventually, everything's cool, and Werble leaves the girls alone. Meanwhile, Land is battling Sharf in a field of flowers, staying chill as he sizes up his opponent and picks his moves carefully. Sharf, clueless about Land's strategy, uses his magic to turn flower petals into metal strips and attacks Land with them. After slashing open Land's shoulder, Sharf drops his guard and thinks he's won, but Land just gets back up, yapping for a few seconds and bugging Sharf with every word. After hearing enough of the yapping, Sharf threatens to take off Land's head if he doesn't admit defeat. Just then, the real Land shows up behind him and knocks him out, sealing the win. Turns out, the Land from earlier was just a clone, and Sharf had no clue. A little bit away, Werble finds Era knocked out and wakes her up, teasing her about losing to such a basic attack. Era says the barrage was too much for her, making Werble worry about the purple-haired weirdo's mana. Eventually, he shakes it off and carries Era like a little kid on his back as he heads out to find Sharf. After a bit of walking, they spot Sharf lying in the flower field. Werble complains as he lifts Sharf up. With about 3 hours until sunset, Werble's pretty much given up on getting anything done, especially since 2 of his teammates are out cold. Soon, it starts to rain outside the barrier, and Werble gets anxious about what's next. He whines a bit, and Era playfully calls him out for acting all high and mighty when he's a nice guy deep down. Werble explains that he's been fighting evil to keep a promise he made to a little girl 29 years ago. Back then, demons were causing havoc up north, so the girl's family had to move to the Central Lands. On the last day he saw her, he promised to fight the demons and help her family return home. Even now, he can't remember her face or voice, but he knows he owes her something. After hearing this, Era calls him an idiot, and he just accepts the title. As they continue on, they accidentally spot a still chilling on a tree branch. Werble stays quiet and uses his bird-catching spell to snag the bird like it's no big deal. This keeps his team on track while the others are hunting for nothing. Meanwhile, in another part of the testing area, Frieren and her partners are still locked in a stare-off with Laufen as Denkin keeps watch from a tree branch. Once he spots Frieren's ears, he instantly realizes she's an elf. Luckily, Laufen only needs to use her high-speed spell once to grab the bird cage from them, and they make a hasty exit with the cage. Just a few steps outside the barrier, Proctor Sense shows up to chat with Genau and gives him a hard time for taking out a few folks just for the exam. Genau gets up and explains the obvious reason why the test is set up that way, but when Sense brings up how the test takers need luck, he lets her know that luck is a skill too. With sunset creeping in, Genau is expecting some big showdown soon. He also figures that Denkin, the super powerful Imperial Mage, is gonna come out on top since he knows just how strong that guy can get when he's backed into a corner. Around that time, Denkin and Richter roll in to slow down Frieren and her team, so they can buy Laufen some time to escape. Frieren asks Denkin why they didn't just use Laufen's speedy spell to grab the still in the first place, and the old guy says it's because Laufen's still green and would scare the bird off before getting close enough. The chat shifts to both sides talking about Frieren and her achievements, and then Frieren questions why they're being so obvious with their attacks. Richter steps in then and promises to hold off the kids while Denkin takes on Frieren, hoping to beat her. Denkin warns Richter not to kill the kids, but then Richter tries to push the old man into action. Eventually, Denkin tells him that becoming a first-class mage isn't worth getting killed over, so Richter better watch his back. Frieren backs up the old guy, calling the title just a title. At this point, Richter's pretty grossed out by Frieren's lack of knowledge. He tells her that earning that title would give a mage access to the great sage and goddess on Earth, Cyrie, who's said to grant any spell they want. Basically, mages can score wealth and power without much cost to them. Sadly, a lot of first-class mages just ask for silly stuff that makes them look awful. After his quick history lesson, he asks Denkin to hold Frieren down for just a minute so he can take out the kids. Denkin warns him again against killing them and promises to punish him if he tries that. Eventually, Richter agrees to ease up on his attacks a bit. After that, he casts a spell that separates Frieren and Denkin from himself and the two girls, so they can fight fair and square. About 1,000 years ago, Flam and her elf buddy Frieren met Saria, the only mage known to have read every grimoire out there and can whip up thousands of spells on the fly. When they show up in front of this legendary sage, both Flam and Frieren pay their respects, but Frieren is left wondering who this lady really is. Watching his partner break away from Frieren, Denkin grumbles about how the young folks are too eager and pumped up about their magical perks. Frieren asks him why he's saying that, and he explains that the real joy of magic comes from the hunt for it. Back in the flashback, Saria is impressed that Flam chose Frieren, another elf, to be her student. After praising Flam's choice, Saria asks Frieren if there's any spell she's been dying to learn so she can hook her up. This once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, though, has Frieren turning it down, echoing what Denkin just said. Saria gets a bit annoyed, calling Frieren an idiot for not having any ambition. In response, Flam stands up for Frieren, saying she's the one who will take down the Demon King and usher in peace. This only irritates Saria more, as she questions whether Flam thinks Frieren can really defeat the Demon King. Flam gets in Saria's head and defends Frieren from all the negativity. After that quick trip down memory lane, Frieren gears up for a showdown with Denkin. Meanwhile, Lewin and Can are trying to coordinate their attacks on Richter, but he blocks everything using his earth magic. Once he figures out their powers, Richter is let down that these are the kids he gets stuck battling with. Lewin and Can, feeling a bit annoyed by his snark, try to get back at him, but Richter schools them on some basic magic knowledge and explains why most spells have all these limitations. Just after dropping all this knowledge, he drops to his knees, touches the ground, and summons a massive boulder to smack the girls around. Richter hopes they'll just stay down, but he's even more disappointed when they hop back up to keep fighting. He warns them not to get any funny ideas if they don't want him to go all out on them. Lewin tries to bluff, claiming Can control the water in a person's body, but Richter sees through her ruse and tells them their threats don't bother him. In the end, Lewin figures him out. If he's as invincible as he claims, then he should have picked a spot with water nearby. She calls him out, asking what he's so scared of, and he tells her to watch her mouth, or he won't hold back. Meanwhile, Frieren and Denkin are locked in a battle of endurance for a few minutes, until Denkin gets a clue about Frieren's strategy. He realizes that if he doesn't finish it now, things could go south for him. Using fancier wind and fire spells, he traps Frieren in a fiery tornado big enough for Genau and Sense, who are outside the barrier, to see. After a little chat, Sense tells Genau she saw someone checking out the barrier the day before. Genau assures her not to stress. That person is just wasting their time, thinking no one's stronger than the Great Sage. After conjuring up the tornado, Denkin is hit hard with a flurry of attacks that he manages to block, turning around to counterattack. But the dude quickly loses hope as Frieren swoops in and drains all his remaining mana. With him down for the count, Frieren threatens to off him if he doesn't spill the beans on where Laufen is. Denkin stays quiet, but then Frieren realizes Laufen was just nearby. She calls out the clueless goofball to come forward with their stille so she can reclaim it and let them go. If not, she's ready to take Denk out. Laufen, who's been hiding just a hair's breadth away, weighs her options and thinks about using her speedy spell, Jilwur, to grab the old dude and hightail it with the still, without Frieren clocking her. Denkin warns her not to fall for Frieren's bait since he's sure the mage isn't gonna kill him, but Laufin does the unexpected, and before long, she gets caught by Frieren, who ties them up and gets her bird back. Once they're all tied to a tree, Laufin asks the old guy why he's so set on becoming a first-class mage. He says he needs that title to get into a certain village and visit an old friend's grave, plain and simple. Then Denkin asks Frieren what her plan is for the kiddos now that Richter knows he's toast. Staying cool, Frieren tells him that Lewin and Can will win the fight, so no need to sweat it. Now that she's done checking out the barrier, she can finally help the girls take down that arrogant jerk. While Frieren is working on smashing the barrier, Richter is still being a pain in the butt for the girls. After almost taking them out for the umpteenth time, Frieren finally casts a spell to break the barrier. Janao and Sense see a bright green light shining from the testing area and can't believe what they're seeing. But when Frieren finally breaks the barrier, Janao figures out the name of the mage who pulled off such a feat and realizes she's the last great mage. Serie, miles away, also spots Frieren's magic and celebrates the return of this great mage. After seeing Frieren do the impossible, Denkin asks her why she broke the barrier, and she says it's so she can help Can control the rainwater and beat up Richter. Meanwhile, Richter sees the barrier has fallen and casually tries to keep fighting. By then, Lewin pins him down with ice magic while Can conjures a massive wave of water and sends it his way. All Richter can do is gawk as the huge wave sweeps him back to Denkin and Laufin's spot. Frieren goes to gather her girls and tells them to keep hiding for another 2 hours until the test is up. Richter mopes about his dumb moves until Denkin reminds them they're not out of options yet. He tells Richter to knock down the tree they're tied to, and he goes for it. Moving on, Denkin urges his team not to give up because they need to track down all the other teams and maybe snag the still from them. Meanwhile, Ubel whines to Fern about the basic spells she's so used to casting and asks her about other spells she can use. During their chat, Land advises Fern not to spill all her tricks since they might face off against each other in the next test. Elsewhere, Denkin and his crew discover a defeated party who lost a member but still holds on to their stille. After thinking it over, Denkin finally decides to show his face. Almost out of mana, Denkin approaches them with a fierce look, ready to settle things with their fists. Once the rain stops, the other teams relax and wait for the test to wrap up. In the end, only 18 out of 57 make it through the test. After a quick rundown on the next test starting in 3 days, Janao sends them off. Later that night, Stark kicks back at the bar, chilling without the girls. The next evening, Stark is woken up by a knock on his door. At first, it's soft, so he ignores it, but soon it turns into a fierce pounding. Annoyed, he throws on some clothes to check out who's being a jerk. When he opens the door, he sees Fern and Frieren waiting for him. He asks if the first test is done, and Fern tells him not only that it's over, but that they've been hanging out since last night. Stark feels a little down because he knows where this is heading. Fern asks if he stayed up all night, and he admits he did. Then she wonders if he's been asleep this whole time. Stark keeps making it obvious he has. Eventually, Fern loses it at both Frieren and Stark for sleeping in and wasting her time. To make it up to her, they have to spend the rest of the day trying to cheer Fern up. They head out, wandering the streets until Frieren decides to take Fern to a nice restaurant she used to hit up with Himmel and the crew 80 years ago. Stark asks if they can afford it, since the place is pretty fancy, but Frieren brushes it off, saying it's no big deal. Meanwhile, Richter is seen tinkering with a magic lamp in his shop for an old lady. Once he gets it working, she thanks him and hands him a piece of candy as a tip. Richter freaks out, telling her not to treat him like a kid. He keeps the candy but is ready to head back into his shop when Denkin and Laufin show up to say hi. Richter knows they're not teammates anymore, so he tells them to buzz off, but Denkin invites him to grab a bite with them at a spot they've been looking for. Richter asks Laufin why she's still hanging around the old guy, and she says it's because he bought her donuts. Richter can't hide his irritation as he just wants to get back to work. Denkin calls him a buzzkill and tells him to loosen up for once. Richter snaps back, telling him to leave him be and eat anywhere he wants. Then Denkin mentions he used to go to that same restaurant with his late wife. That gets Richter to change his tune, and he decides to tag along. Over in a dark, deserted alley, Land is hanging out when he sees a mother cat and her kitten finally reunited after being apart for days. Shortly after, Ubel joins him for a stroll. After some small talk, Land asks Ubel why she didn't just kill Werble on a whim during their fight, especially since she usually has a hair trigger on that stuff. Ubel says it's complicated, but after a quick memory flash, she explains that she feels for him. She then holds Land down using Werble's Sorganale spell and breaks it down for him. Turns out, Ubel has this weird ability to use the signature spells of people she empathizes with, which is why she didn't take out Werble. She half-heartedly tries to get Land to spill his background story so she can feel bad for him and learn to make perfect clones of herself. Land sees right through her annoying game and calls her out for being a dimwit and messing with people's magic without truly understanding it. In the end, he tells her he's not telling her anything, so if she wants to kill him, go for it. Ubel changes her mind and lets him go, but makes sure to follow him every step of the way until he finally gives her what she wants. As night fell, Denkin and his crew finally stumbled upon the restaurant they'd been looking for. Denkin recognized it as the spot he used to hit up with his late wife and hesitated a bit before walking in. Inside, they spotted Frieren and her friends checking out the menu and decided to just kick back and enjoy their meals without a fuss. When their food arrived, Stark got himself some omuris, while Frieren and Fern piled their plates high with all kinds of meats and desserts. As they were digging in, Frieren remembered the last time she hung out at a place like this with her old friend friends. Back then, they couldn't stop raving about how tasty the food was, so much so that they had the head chef come out just to say thanks. Frieren stuffed her face, thinking she'd never get to enjoy such deliciousness again. The head chef even promised her that the restaurant would be around for the next 200 years, serving up the same amazing flavors. Fern and Stark were super stoked to get a taste of such great food in their lives, and asked Frieren if anyone deserves to be this happy. Just then, Yubel and Land were seen munching at the same restaurant like nothing was ever wrong. After they finished eating, Frieren and her crew headed home. The next morning, Stark was out near the edge of town, meditating, when an old man just appeared out of nowhere and started giving him some life advice. Soon, Frieren showed up and asked Stark who the old guy was. Stark said he had no clue since the man only pops up when he's training. They moved past that, and Frieren invited Stark to help smooth things over with Fern, since she had ticked her off again. When Stark asked what happened this time, Frieren mentioned that it was her turn to go shopping that morning, but she overslept and missed the good sales. Now, Fern was really ticked off at her, and wouldn't even look her way. Frieren begged Stark to mediate and help calm down this angry bird. Finally, Stark got the guts to ask Fern how to butter her up. Fern told him to grab her some snacks, and he whined about how bratty she's been lately. With no other option, Stark took Frieren to the snack shop to grab some goodies for Fern. Meanwhile, Can was watching Werble and Sharf from a balcony, harassing some random dude, and couldn't figure out why. Thankfully, nothing weird happened as Leween showed up dressed like a spoiled noble brat. Can called her cute, and Leween said it was because her clueless brothers always buy her stuff she doesn't even need. Can went all out to treat Leween like a proper noble, which made Leween yank Can's hair. Stark and Frieren are at the snack store waiting for Fern to pick something out. Stark tells her to hurry up, and Fern says he should just choose for her. A few minutes later, Leween and Can show up and are super happy to see Frieren. After grabbing some snacks for their upset friend, the five of them head back to the inn, and Stark starts to get to know everyone. Just when he thinks his day can't get any worse, Werble and Sharf stroll in and size him up. Once they figure out he's got all the qualities they need, they ask him to be their frontliner to take out a fresser that's been wrecking the crops. Werble asks if Fern is cool with it, and she gives him the go-ahead. So, Werble pulls Stark along, and the girls head back to the inn. There, they give Fern a box of snacks to thank her for helping them move on to the second test. Frieren has a flashback to Himmel, who once helped a random girl and taught her that changing someone's life could make you a hero too. Over the next few hours, she has a blast with the girls, and finally gets Fern to smile again. Then, Leween chimes in and reminds Frieren how long it took her to wake up on the second day. Frieren tells her to shut the heck up, but then a messenger bird shows up with news about the next test. Unfortunately for them, the proctor for the next test is Sense, and they've learned that her tests are super tough. Around that time, the others get the news too. After checking out the difficulty of her test, Janao gives her a hard time for making it so challenging, but Sense clarifies that hers doesn't involve killing anyone. The next day, all the folks taking the second test meet up at the entrance of the King's Tomb ruins in the north to get the lowdown on what's about to go down. When Sense, the proctor, shows up, she grabs their attention and welcomes everyone to the testing site. After clearing up some rumors about how dangerous her test is, Sense dives into the details. To pass this test, the contestants need to raid the King's Tomb behind her and make it to the bottom of the dungeon while dodging traps and obstacles. If they can pull that off, they've passed the test. Before she moves on, one of the bald guys in the group asks if her goal is to make everyone fail again, since that's her rep. Sense gets kind of annoyed with the guy and tells him that first-class mages are the ones who turn the impossible into possible, so he shouldn't expect an easy ride. Just then, someone else asks how they'll prove they've made it to the bottom. Sense responds that she'll be following a specific group down, but promises not to interfere. When she gets down there, she'll announce who passes. She also shows off some special golem bottles and hands them out to everyone to keep them safe. If anyone finds themselves in a jam, they can break the bottle to get the golem to carry them back to the entrance. But anyone who uses their bottle will automatically fail the testo. Keep that in mind. Once she wraps that up, she tells them the bottles will shatter at dawn the next day, which will end the test. With that, she sends everyone on their way, and the test begins. For the first hour, nobody goes into the dungeon since everyone's busy chatting about strategies. Denkin teams up with Richter and Laufen again, trying to get everyone to clear the dungeon together. But, of course, there's always someone who messes things up, and Airhead pipes up and shoots down Denkin's idea. After rambling nonsense for a few minutes, the guy stomps into the dungeon alone. Before long, others start heading in, forming groups of 2 or 3. Moments later, Frieren and Fern get ready to start their test. Fern asks Frieren why she doesn't just wait and join another team, and Frieren explains it's because there's no chance to work together now. Noticing Frieren, Sense chooses to walk with their team. As they explore, Frieren and Fern work on mapping out the dungeon, checking things out before going to the lower levels. After helping Sense avoid a trap, Frieren and Fern end up talking about Himmel's crush on dungeons. Right there, Frieren recalls yet another one of her boring memories with Himmel from one of their dungeon runs. When she finishes reminiscing, she asks Fern what she thinks about it. Fern just sighs and keeps quiet for the rest of the journey. A few hours later, Denkin and his crew see the last group, Leween and Can, head into the dungeon. With only about 5 of them left, Denkin decides to make do with what he has to pass the test. When he grumbles about everyone's stupidity for not teaming up, Richter offers him a different perspective. In the end, the old guy stands up and gets serious about starting the test. A little while later, Frieren trips over a funky-looking treasure chest and gets super hyped, thinking there's a rare grimoire inside. Fern, knowing the box is actually a mimic, tries to warn her elf master, but Frieren is too stubborn to listen. Instead, she sticks her head right inside the treasure, only to get stuck in the mimic's jaws. A minute later, it hits Frieren that she's in trouble, and she starts screaming for help. Fern rushes in to pull her out. Meanwhile, Sense, who's been watching the whole mess, regrets ever thinking these two were impressive. In the next scene, Denkin and his crew are slicing through the dungeons like butter. After dodging a few traps, they finally hit a tough floor. Just as they're about to open the next door, the gargoyle statues guarding it spring to life and go after them. Denkin and his crew do their best to fight back against the wild gargoyles, with some of them managing to dodge and take down a few. Unfortunately, one gets caught in the crossfire and is tossed into a room with crushing spike slabs on both sides. As the door seals shut, the slabs start closing in on the girl. After finishing off the gargoyles, Denkin tries to smash the door down, but he's not having any luck. In the heat of the moment, he tells the girl to break her golem bottle, and she does just that. In seconds, the golem bursts through the door and scoops the girl back to safety. Meanwhile, Fern gets tired of wrestling with Frieren and decides to switch things up. This time, she shoves Frieren into the treasure box, which ends up choking and spitting her back out. As Fern fixes her hair, Frieren shares a thing or two about her previous experience with the mimic. Once they're cleaned up, they keep heading down to the bottom of the dungeon. On their way, they run into more gargoyles and take them out before moving on to the next floor. Almost at the bottom, Frieren takes a break to check out all the magical junk she's collected on their travels. While they're chilling, Sense asks Fern how to understand her better. Even as the youngest third-class mage ever, Sense doesn't see any drive or passion in Fern and she wonders why. Fern sighs and explains that she became a mage to keep a promise to Hyder, but now that she's here, she doesn't feel that spark anymore. Sense asks what keeps her going, and Fern admits she's still at it just to make Frieren happy. Hearing this, Sense feels pretty awesome about sticking with them. Elsewhere, Werble and his crew quickly find themselves in a tight spot in the dungeon, sensing a shift in the vibe. Before they can wrap their heads around what's happening, someone zaps Era with Sorganale and attacks the other two. Werble blocks the hit and tells Sharf to keep the enemy from seeing them. Once they pull that off, the foes finally reveal themselves. Turns out, these enemies are perfect replicas of the three of them, which finally clicks for Werble about why no one has ever passed the second test. Meanwhile, Denkin's squad runs into the same problem but manages to outsmart and take down their copies before anyone gets hurt. After that, Denkin digs into the magic behind the replicas, explaining that these fakes are no joke. The only upside is that it's pretty easy to tell the fakes apart from the originals, but they've still got a tough road ahead. They keep chatting for a few minutes before getting up and heading to the boss's room. What they find behind the door is totally unexpected. Before they know it, they're staring down Frieren's replica. If they apply all the tricks they've picked up so far, they'll realize this replica is seriously strong. Denkin gets his team ready for what's next, so they're not caught off guard. In the next scene, Janao is hanging out with his partner in their office, chatting about the Lord of the Dungeon, aka Spiegel, the water mirror fiend. Janao explains that Spiegel is a monster from some mythical times, showing up in Ewig, the sage's epic stories. Right now, they think Spiegel has the power to read the memories of anyone who steps into the dungeon, and makes perfect replicas of them. In today's world, Einsam is the only monster that's kind of like Spiegel. After a bit, Janao's partner asks him why Sense chose such a tricky place for her test. Janao replies that she knows beating yourself requires staying cool and thinking clearly, which fits with Sense being a pacifist. Luckily, she has safety measures in place to avoid any unnecessary deaths. Next up, Denkin and his crew are bolting from the boss room as the Frieren replica starts going after them. Once they're outside, the gang starts brainstorming how to deal with their new mess. Meanwhile, Land and Yubel are huddled together, standing in front of a dead end. Turns out, Land got ambushed by an Ubel clone and is now seriously hurt. Yubel, not really bothered that he's injured, asks him how to tell if her clone is as perfect as it seems. While she's at it, she spots her clone hanging out down the hall after turning a corner. Before responding to her, Land throws out a couple of comments about her before hinting at how imperfect the clone really is. Once Ubel catches his drift, he explains the clone's attack pattern, noting it thinks just like she does. At the end of their chat, Ubel sees the pool of blood under Land's wound, but instead of feeling bad, she asks if he's the real deal or not. Land plays it cool while Ubel tries to help him out by offering her golem bottle so he doesn't bite the dust. However, Land turns her down and tries to help her see reason when Ubel suddenly goes after her clone, fighting to get Land's bottle back. During the first half of her battle against her clone, Ubel keeps up with the attacks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When it finally comes, she lets her replica pin her down with Sorganale. Just then, the real Land shows up, and the clone gets distracted, looking away from her. Ubel seizes the chance to slice the fake in half and claim victory. After the fight, she moves closer to the injured Land, a bit shocked that it was just a clone. The real Land soon appears and asks Ubel why she fought to get the bottle back, even though she knew the version of him that was hurt was a clone. Land thinks Ubel believed he was being nice, but then Ubel lays out her master plan, leaving Land a little annoyed by her reasoning. Eventually, Ubel thanks Land for helping her learn more about him, and Land asks if she can finally empathize with him. When she replies no, they keep moving forward. After going down a few more floors, Frieren randomly stops to check out a hidden room she senses. Fern and Sense are urging her to stop messing around and just let them finish the test, but Frieren trusts her instincts more than anything. She fiddles with the mechanism until she finally opens the door to the hidden room. Once the door swings wide, the trio steps inside to check out the tomb of a special king from the Unified Dynasty era. They take a moment to admire the murals on the walls and then move on after soaking it all in. After heading down a few more floors, they finally spot Denkin and his crew hanging out at the entrance to the boss room. Frieren stops to ask them what they're waiting for. Denkin helps her peek through the door, and she sees her replica just chilling in the middle, waiting for her first challenger. Excited to see herself recreated, Frieren shares some thoughts with the guys to figure out what her weaknesses might be. Richter suggests using restraint or hypnosis magic to beat her, but unfortunately, Frieren is resistant to both. However, Denkin thinks that trying that magic might create an opening for the real Frieren to land an attack. To test out the magic, Denkin has Method use hers on Frieren. She uses both restraint and hypnosis spells, but realizes Frieren isn't bluffing. After analyzing the situation, Method suggests they find someone who specializes in hypnosis magic to help with Frieren. When Denkin asks if she knows anyone, she mentions Adel, a non-combat mage who specializes in hypnosis. The downside? Adel is pretty weak, and her magic only works on those with a mind of their own. Up to this point, they don't really know if these replicas have minds or not. Denkin sighs, realizing they're missing a lot of info. In the next scene, Adel and her friends are hiding from what looks like Sense's replica. After keeping their mana under wraps for a long time, Edel still feels like she can't do much to save her teammates, Blay and Dunstay, and take on the crazy replica. She figures she might try using her hypnosis magic on the replica if it even has a mind, but if it doesn't, she feels pretty useless as a teammate. She analyzes the replica a few meters away and makes her deductions. Soon after, she suggests they give up and head back home until they can try again in 3 years. But then Blay asks her to give hypnosis a shot on the replica. Edel explains that while her family's hypnosis magic isn't top-notch, she can still make the replica kneel and create an opening they can use if she can make eye contact, and has 15 seconds to activate the spell. Before she can finish, the crazy replica spots them and strikes first. To buy those 15 seconds, Edel tells her team to set up a barrier to block the replica's attacks while she works on the spell. Blay and Dunstay do their part and manage to block the barrage. Sadly, their barrier doesn't last long, and the replica takes it down in no time. With the barrier gone, Edel locks eyes with the replica and tells it to kneel. Just then, the replica attacks first and stabs her in the chest. That's when Edel realizes that the replicas don't have minds of their own. She decides to use her escape bottle and leaves her teammates to join the other teams. Soon enough, the golem appears and carries her to the surface. Meanwhile, the rest keep going down as Denkin and his crew decide to take down Frieren's replica with brute force. As the battle between Werble and his replicas keeps raging on, Werble gets so into it that he easily defeats Era by causing the ceiling to collapse on her, exposing the other two. Hearing everything Denkin just said, Fern steps up to fight Frieren's replica, and everyone instantly agrees with her. With that out of the way, Frieren and the team start chatting about the best game plan to take down her replica. The only thing they're missing is whether the replica has a mind of its own. Thankfully, before they jump to conclusions, a hurt Dunst shows up to spill the tea on what he's learned from Edel. The crew spots him and rushes over to help. Before tending to his wounds, they ask about his teammates, Edel and Blay. Dunst explains that Edel had to bail on the test using her bottle while Blay stayed behind to hold off Sense's replica while he made a run for it. Hearing this, Dunstay mentions he has valuable info for them, but he needs to know they aren't going to stab him in the back. Denkin assures the guy, promises to have his back, and has Method patch him up before they dive into their strategy session. Once Method stops the bleeding, Dunstay reveals Adel's finding. The replicas can imitate having a mind, but they're pretty much brainless. This gem of info saves them a bunch of time chasing after nothing. Still, Denkin's got some issues figuring out what the replicas are and who the heck made them. Richter tries to remind him that it's not about that as long as they figure out the replicas' weaknesses. Lewin and Can show up on the same level to share whatever they know about the monster behind the replicas. Lewin's brother took the test before, so she's got some useful deets about the monster creating the replicas. Richter gives her a hard time for not teaming up from the get-go, but Lewin shoots back that she'd have better luck counting stars than working with a jerk like him. Ouch! She even calls Richter an old man, which hits him right in the feels. Once they clear that awkwardness, Lewin lays out how to beat the replicas for good. She says the Spiegel monster's just beyond that door, and if they can take down the Frieren replica in the boss room, they can reach the real monster causing all this chaos. Luckily, the Spiegel monster is weak, so they shouldn't have any problems taking it down. Denkin and the others take note, but Lewin urges them to hurry since the replicas have a nasty habit of piling up in the dungeon's lower levels to go after whoever's there. As despair starts to creep in, Fern speaks up, asking some questions to see if the replicas share any weaknesses with the real ones. When Denkin probes her, Fern gets up and motions for Frieren to move toward a wall in the distance. Frieren does as she's told, and Fern attacks her seriously. Of course, Frieren blocks the hit, but soon Denkin and the others catch on to the weakness. Turns out, Frieren stops sensing mana every time she casts a spell, but she was too embarrassed to fess up about that rookie mistake. With this revelation, Fern and the crew brainstorm a solid plan to take down the Frieren replica. In the midst of their discussions, Fern spots a smile on Frieren's face and asks why she looks so happy. Frieren shares it's because she was reminiscing about the old days when she, Himmel, and the others would come up with strategies to take down dungeon bosses and stuff like that. After a few more of their nostalgic reminiscences, they wrap up their strategy meeting. Soon after, Frieren and Fern give the rest of the team their parting words before heading into the room to tackle the Frieren replica, with Frieren warning them to stay sharp and manage the number of replicas gathering in the dungeon's lower sections to avoid getting surrounded. Once they get the green light, Frieren and Fern swing open the door and step into the boss room. After they leave, Denkin kicks off phase 2 of the plan, leaving Frieren and Fern to deal with the heavy lifting. Inside the boss room, Fern is doing her best to dodge replica Frieren's attacks, hiding whenever she gets the chance, while the real Frieren, who's just as strong and smart as her replica, confronts her. For the next few minutes, both Frieren and her duplicate are throwing out some wicked spells, both with murder in mind. During the fight, the real Frieren even gets a reminder of just how scary she can be when she's serious. Earlier, she had already thrown out the kind of spell Fern needs to use to take down the replica once she gets the opportunity. But when Fern hears she should use the Zoltrak spell, she starts to freak out and question herself. Luckily, a little motivational speech from Frieren helps her get her head back in the game. Eventually, she finds the guts to trust her skills. Just as she's about to make her move, another annoying flashback pops up. This flashback is from 1,000 years ago when Flam had just died, and Frieren took her will to Flam's master, Saria. Saria didn't seem to care much about her student's death, and read the will without much emotion. What she discovers inside really bums her out, because she never expected the carefree Flam to actually achieve her goal of getting humans to study magic openly. Turns out Flam had gotten the Emperor to agree to allow the open study of magic right before she passed. Now she wanted Saria to take over and teach humans magic. This realization really ticks Saria off at Flam for being disrespectful, but she also tells Frieren that Flam's success is going to speed up humanity's growth big time. In just 1,000 years, Saria believes humans will be powerful enough to take down the Demon King and pull off other incredible feats. Saying that, Saria tears the paper apart, insisting she's not about to teach magic to just anyone because that would be a waste of her time. Frieren jumps in and says Flam knew this would happen. The only reason she sent that letter was to let Saria know she achieved her dreams. As Frieren is about to leave, Saria stops her and insists they take a walk together. During the walk, Saria shares a few things about her master and explains how handy Flam's favorite spell was, which could create a field of flowers. Back when Flam was younger, Saria didn't think much of her. She figured the girl was dreaming way too big. Saria saw Flam's life as too short to make any real impact on the world, but now she's witnessed what determination and a focused human mind can accomplish. She then talks about how time works for both humans and elves, noting how much time has passed since humans kicked off civilization. Now all humans need is about 1,000 years to catch up to the elves and maybe even outdo them. Before wrapping up, Saria warns Frieren never to let go of her training. She'll need it every single day of her life. Frieren takes a deep breath as she steps into this new era of mages and human magic. With the flashback done, Fern unleashes her Zoltrak spell to finish off replica Frieren. Unfortunately for both Fern and her, the replica bounces back Fern's Zoltrak spell and hits her with an even stronger spell to take her down. Luckily, the real Frieren steps in to block it. In no time, she conjures up a golem to stand tall against her replica and keeps her at bay, but the replica just keeps throwing powerful spells and attacks at both Frieren and Fern. That's when Frieren realizes it's turned into a battle of endurance. Meanwhile, Richter and Lewin find themselves on the same team, following Denkin's earlier plan. Denkin thinks they can take out all the replicas one by one if they split into 2 or 3-person groups before everyone gathers in one spot. He's also got them communicating to avoid any unnecessary chaos or damage. So far, his plan seems to be working as each team finds it easier to take down those annoying replicas instead of flying solo. Still, most of them are on edge, since they haven't seen the replicas of 3 of the strongest mages among them, Sense, Denkin, and Fern. Before they let their guards slip, Denkin warns everyone to stay sharp. Richter takes a moment to throw shade at Sense for being around and making things tougher for everyone. Sense snaps back, telling him that if he sees her as a hassle, then he's not cut out to be a top-tier mage. And with that, the fight against the replica continues. Lewin and Richter chill out after taking down their share of replicas. Just when they're at their weakest, Sense's replica suddenly pops up out of nowhere and stabs both of them in the chest. Richter is a bit surprised by Sense's evasive moves, but he's not risking his neck for a dumb test. So he smashes his bottle along with Lewin's, and they both get whisked away to safety. Denkin arrives just in time to see Richter and Lewin throwing in the towel. He curses himself but gets that he won't change a thing by being there. Soon, Ubel and Lan show up to check out the creature in front of them. When Ubel realizes who Denkin is hiding from, she asks him if taking down Sense is necessary to pass the dungeon test. Denkin says yes, so she gears up and fills Land in before charging out to face the replica. Ubel is ready to use Real Sidon, a spell that slices through through just about anything she can think of to take out the wild replica. Lan tries to warn her that cutting through defensive spells like that is risky, but she pushes forward and unleashes her strongest slicing spell. Sense immediately recognizes Yubel's mana and explains why she thinks this wild third-class mage is going to win the fight. 3 years back, during the second test overseen by Berg, Yubel did something insane. Berg was a first-class mage with unbeatable defensive mana that shielded him from all kinds of magical hits. With his unyielding cloak on, there was almost no shot for anyone to breach his defenses. To pass his second test, Berg dared anyone to break through, and no one had figured it out until Ubel's turn. She just imagined cutting through cloth and used that idea to slice through Berg's clothes and body like it was nothing, killing him in the process. After the exam, Yubel got disqualified, but Sense talked to her that day before dismissing her just to get an idea of what was going on in that girl's head. When she asked Yubel how she took down the impenetrable cloak, Yubel said she simply used her cutting spell while picturing scissors slicing through cloth. Sense just sat there wondering where this brat came from. Once Yubel finishes her story, Sense processes what she just heard. Eventually, she realizes how differently Yubel thinks and decides she's worthy of becoming a first-class mage. Unfortunately, since Yubel is disqualified, that won't happen, but she can always try again in the next 3 years. Before leaving the office, Yubel asks Sense about her hair and how she takes care of it. Sense spills her feelings about her hair, saying she hates it so much that sometimes she just wants to chop it all off. Using that knowledge now, Ubel simply cuts all of the replica's hair, taking it down in the process. Elsewhere, Werbel and his crew finally meet Methode, who fills them in on the info they need. As she chats with them, her mana detections pick up the results of the fight between Yubel and Sense, so she shares that info with Werbel and the others too. Werbel pledges his loyalty to the team and asks Methode what to do next. Methode points out Denkin's replica and urges Werbel's team to handle that one while she takes care of Fern's replica. Era gets a bit confused and asks Methode if she's strong enough to tackle Fern. Methode reassures her that she's got a few tricks up her sleeve, so there's no need to stress about it. With everything in place, Werbel and the team get ready to start their mission. Meanwhile, Ubel, Land, and Denkin bump into the replicas they've taken down before, realizing they're in a long battle until Frieren takes out the wild monster creating the replicas. As the action ramps up, Methode finally gets her chance to fight Fern. In the meantime, Frieren remembers something she told Fern during their strategy meeting about ditching her defense to create an opening, hoping her replica would do the same, so Fern could nail down an even bigger attack. Fern tries to warn her about how risky that can be, but Frieren insists not to sweat it because she has a plan. With that in mind, Fern keeps watching as the two powerful mages go at it, unleashing the most wicked spells ever. When Frieren gives Fern the opening she needs, Fern doesn't waste a second blasting a hole in the replica's chest. Even so, that wasn't enough, and the replica still comes back swinging, pinning Fern to the wall and hurting her for real this time. Luckily, the replica gets a little distracted and doesn't notice the real Frieren coming for her. When it comes down to it, the real Frieren takes out her replica, saves Fern, and moves on to smash Spiegel. Almost instantly, the replicas vanish, and the remaining students pass the test. Sense makes sure to congratulate them for getting this far, telling them their achievement won't go unnoticed. When Denkin asks about the stars of the hour, they find Frieren and Fern just chilling in the treasure room with Spiegel. The next day, Fern hits up the inn and gets into another spat with Frieren. To chill out, she bounces from the inn and finds Stark just hanging out and training on his usual cliffside. Stark, kind of freaked out by Fern's angry vibe, reluctantly lets her sit with him. Not long after, he finds out what really went down between Fern and Frieren. Turns out, Fern was mad at Frieren for how she talked about her broken staff from that scuffle with her replica in the ruined king's dungeon. While Fern wants to fix her old staff, Frieren is all about getting her a new one. Fern isn't throwing away her old staff because Hyder gave it to her, and Frieren knows that. Stark quickly gets why Fern's so upset with her master. It's all about keeping the memory of Hyder alive with that staff. Meanwhile, Kan is seen trying to lift up her down-and-out friend, Lewin, when Frieren walks by. Kan and Lewin rush over to say hi, but they're blown away when they see Frieren holding a bag full of broken wood. Before they can ask what's up, the scene cuts to black. Next up, Denkin swings by Richter's magic shop pretending to be a customer, but he's really just checking in on his old teammate. Richter sees right through his little act but plays it cool. While Denkin browses around, he asks Richter why he's still running the shop when he's in such a bad mood. Richter tells him that life goes on, and even if he's feeling down, he still has to pay the bills. Hearing this, Denkin just shuts up and nods along to everything Richter says about his own failures. Eventually, Richter gets fed up, and Denkin calls him an arrogant young guy who reminds him of his younger days. Even after getting dissed by someone so much younger, Denkin still drops some advice on Richter about not losing hope and working harder to try the test again in 3 years. With that, Denkin leaves with Laufen. Richter's just left there staring at the ceiling until Frieren strolls into the shop to get Fern's staff fixed. Already in a bad mood, Richter inspects the staff and gives Frieren some nonsense advice before telling her to just forget about fixing it and get a new one instead. Frieren, not really grasping emotions, accepts that and gets ready to leave. But then Richter calls her back and decides to fix it while she looks around the shop. While working on it, Richter apologizes for calling the staff trash and speeds things up so she can get it back that day. Hours later, Stark and Fern head back to the inn after a full day outside. On their way, they talk about how Frieren is trying to understand better together just as they bump into Richter, who recognizes her from the second test. He stops the purple-haired mage and warns her to take better care of her staff from now on to avoid any more mishaps. By the time Fern gets home, she finds her staff all fixed up and waiting for her on her bed. She remembers something Hyder said about Frieren trying to get a handle on human emotions and realizes Frieren really made an effort to understand her attitude. With that, she puts her staff down and fawns over her master. The next day, all 12 contestants for the third test show up at the venue to check out the final test that'll make them first-class mages. Right before the test kicks off, Saria, the legendary sage, gathers the exam proctors to give them a hard time for letting someone as powerful as Frieren take part and help so many mages move up so easily. She feels like a bunch of weak mages got this far, not by their own strength, but just with Frieren's help. If they compete in the real third test, some might not make it. To prevent that mess, Saria asks Lernan, a prodigy, for permission to be the new proctor for the last test. She promises that this new test will be calm and based on her gut feeling. She lets Lernan speak up shortly after her, and the guy realizes he can't compete with Frieren since he notices she's been hiding her mana to trick everyone, including demons. Saria smiles at the shy dude and asks the others if they noticed the same thing about Frieren. Most of them say they didn't think she was doing that because her mana didn't seem to fluctuate at all. If she was, she must have spent her whole life mastering that impractical skill. Saria smirks and tells everyone that Frieren has been mostly focused on hiding her mana to fool both demons and people. Considering how much time Frieren has put into learning various spells, she might seem weak, but she still manages to take down lots of demons each year, which shows her mana control is on point. For Lernan to catch, that means he's pretty talented. Saria stands up, teasing the old man for being so timid to the end. She acts like she regrets taking on human students because they die way too often. Plus, she's not a fan of Lernan's modesty and humility, thinking those traits kept him from facing strong opponents in his life. After the meeting, Saria heads to the interview room, ready to interview the contestants. When Frieren hears that Saria will be doing the picking, she instantly knows that the childish sage will fail, since she's not the mage Saria wants her to be yet. But honestly, Frieren doesn't care what Saria thinks about her. When the test starts, the first contestant, Laufin, walks in for her interview. Before Laufin can get far into the nice room, Saria sees into her head and fails her right away. Laufin asks why she did that, and Saria explains. After failing about 4 more students, she finally gets to interview Frieren. Saria asks Frieren what her favorite spell is, giving her a chance to show she's first-class mage material. Frieren replies that it's a spell to create a field of flowers, which just annoys Saria, leading her to fail Frieren immediately. Frieren ignores her and walks out. Before she goes too far, Saria calls her back and asks how she managed to defeat the Demon King with such a carefree attitude. Frieren says she didn't do it alone, and mentions the 3 other heroes who fought alongside her, then drifts off into yet another annoying flashback. In this one, Himmel and Frieren are chatting about why Himmel chose her to be their mage for the mission. Himmel tells her about the first time they met when he got lost, picking herbs in the woods and gave up trying to get home. That's when Frieren, the lone elf, appeared and pointed him in the right direction. Before he left, she created that beautiful field of flowers that caught Himmel's eye. Frieren then tells Saria she met such amazing people simply because she cast that spell for Himmel back when she was younger. As she leaves, she warns Saria to watch out for Fern's skills, but Saria just scoffs. When Fern finally enters the room, Saria isn't impressed at first, but she becomes curious and asks Fern what she can see. Fern becomes the first mage ever to notice the fluctuations in Saria's mana. Saria instantly falls for Fern and begs her to be her student. Fern turns her down so many times that Saria just feels let down. In the end, Fern calls herself Frieren's only student and lets Saria make the decision after that. Eventually, Saria passes Fern and moves on to the next contestant. Soon, Saria meets Denkin, who she thinks is just an old dude with no spark or drive. But after checking out how he thinks and gutsy he is, she realizes she's totally wrong and gives him a pass on a whim. Next, she comes across Yubel and just breezes by her without saying a word. Yubel's caught off guard since she didn't expect to be passed so quickly. But hey, a win's a win, so she takes it and leaves. Up next is Land, who shows off his clones to Saria, and she gets seriously annoyed with this clown for not taking the first-class exam seriously. Land tries to play dumb, but Saria calls him out, saying she knows his real body hasn't budged from his hometown since the test kicked off. She even nails exactly what he'd be doing right then, and Land's shocked because even Yubel couldn't figure that one out. Still, Saria respects his guts and gives him a pass. Her next contestant is Werble, and she fires some questions his way to figure out his thought process. Once she gets the answers she's looking for, she happily passes him and moves on. Methode happens to be the last contender, and she gets a pass too just for saying the right things. After the test wraps up, Saria apologizes to Sense for being rude earlier. Contrary to what she thought before, most of the contestants are actually first-class material. Hours later, the folks who flopped are moping around, thinking about training for the next 3 years for the next test. As Frieren and Fern leave the building, Denkin calls out to them and thanks Frieren for helping him score that title, since it'll make visiting a certain grave way easier. The next day, Stark takes Fern to a snack shop where she struggles to pick something she likes. Once she finally chooses her snack, Laufin shows up with Denkin, and it turns out they both like the same treats. To keep the peace, Denkin buys extra snacks for both girls and sits down to munch with them. Even though Stark feels a bit awkward about the whole thing, he asks Fern who the old man is. Once Stark finds out he's an Imperial mage, he freaks out and apologizes for being casual with him earlier. Denkin reassures him it's all good, and then starts talking about his late wife and how he has no grandkids, explaining he only chased magic and power to heal her, but by the time he learned of the Continental Association of Magic, it was already too late. His wife was gone. He tells Fern that he'd always seen magic as a way to settle disputes, but Frieren reminded him just how fun magic can actually be. He tells Fern to thank Frieren, but Fern tells him to do it himself. As for Frieren, she's off somewhere picking random books from the library to study, strolling down the street when she spots an old woman struggling to keep her stuff from falling off her stall. Werble shows up to help her out and then calls Frieren out for ignoring the woman. Frieren flips the convo back on him, saying he looks like a killer. Werble agrees and goes into his backstory, saying he got this good by listening to all those boring hero tales about Himmel that were going around in his village. When he was younger, he'd get annoyed at his friends for only sharing dull stories about Himmel instead of actual heroics. But as he got older and faced more demon attacks, he realized those grand tales had nothing to do with the village since everyone's just trying to live their lives. When Frieren asks what his point is, he says he's just saying he's here because of all the stories he's heard about Himmel. With that, Werble gets up, feeling like he made a point, and heads off to join his friends. Before disappearing from sight, Werble tells Frieren to enjoy her time with people more because death isn't the only goodbye that exists. Shortly after he's gone, Frieren remembers another moment with the heroes, Himmel and the gang. This time, the goofball Himmel was rambling about some philosophical nonsense regarding guiding sheep. After the annoying walk down memory lane, she heads back to the inn and finds out Fern got invited to the association building to receive her first-class mage credentials. Since she can bring guests, Fern decides to bring Stark and Frieren along. Unfortunately, when they arrive, the trio learns the hard way that Frieren has been banned by Seria from entering the building for the next 1,000 years. Frieren asks the receptionist what she did to deserve this, but then Fern figures Seria must be really mad at Frieren for not following the path she expected. So, Frieren and Stark end up waiting outside all evening for Fern to finish her business. Later that night, Frieren praises how far Fern has come, saying she's glad Fern has reached that level of magehood. Just then, Lernan shows up and apologizes on Seria's behalf. After observing him closely, Frieren realizes the old mage noticed her mana fluctuations. She praises him, calling him a war hero born in a peaceful time. Lernan agrees, saying that's how Seria sees him too. He thinks if he had been born in a tougher era, he could have been a way more powerful mage. Right now, he doesn't want Seria to feel lonely when he's gone, so he plans to attack Frieren to keep his name alive in her memory. Before Frieren can respond, he strikes her and injures her soldiers. But after hearing his lame speech, Frieren stays cool and tells him Seria cares about the students she's trained and has never regretted choosing them. After another flashback, Frieren leaves the loser to join Fern, who's just gotten her new spell. Once she's gone, Lernan learns something new about his master and realizes she loves him just as much as he loves her. The next day, Stark says goodbye to his new friends in Oberst and heads out with his peers to start their journey to Ende. As they leave the city, Frieren figures out Fern's new spell, which makes clothes clean. Frieren compliments her on getting such a handy spell and asks if Seria was mad about it being so boring. Fern admits Seria was pretty annoyed, but they both don't care. Before too long, Lewin and Can pop up to say goodbye to their friend Frieren. After a quick farewell, the trio continues on, and Fern asks Frieren why she didn't say anything special to the girls before leaving. Frieren replies it's because it would feel awkward if they ever met again. As you'd expect, she backs up her point with another memory from Himmel.